It's okay? Not the entire, so I'll bring it up still. Okay. You're right. Welcome. Woo. Welcome to California Department of Aging, continuously improving in our technology. That's our welcome. I believe, let me check with the team here, the microphone helps us here in the room, the phone is on, and the Zoom is working, as far as we know, and captioning is beginning. Okay, all systems go, as they say. Why don't we start, as we do, with introductions, and then I have a few remarks before we turn over to the subcommittee members, the workhorses, to walk us through a wonderful agenda. I'm Kim McCoy-Wade. I'm the Director of the Department of Aging and convener of all things master plan.
Hi, I'm Carrie Graham. I'm from University of California and acting as a consultant to the master plan.
I'm Patty Berg, former state assemblywoman and former area agency on aging director for 20 years in northern Humboldt.
I'm Ellen Goodwin, part of the CDA team. Do you know who runs that? Hi, Claire. Yeah, we're going to try to turn that down. Thank you. Claire Ramsey from Justice and Aging. Hold it about 6 inches away.
Yeah.
Susan DeMorris, the Alzheimer's Association. Ladies Alliance for Leadership and Education.
Sarah Steenhausen with the SCAN Foundation.
Donna Denton, University of Southern California, Association of California Caregiver Resource Centers.
Nina Wyla Harbaugh with AOP California.
Hello, Julia Segura McDonough, liaison to the Secretary of Labor and Leadership and Government Fellow with the Open Society Foundation.
Anna Acton with Freed and the ADRC of Nevada County.
Burnett with the California Association of Health Facilities.
Catherine Whitmore, representing Disability Rights California.
Karen Kiesler, California Association of Public Authorities for IHSS.
Karen Bees, the Director of Sonoma County Human Services Department and the AAA Director.
Marty Emoto, CDCAN, family member of CDCAN, California Disability Senior Community Action Network.
Hi, I'm Christina Buss, Hamilton, representing United Domestic Workers, UDW. Maya Altman, Health Science Advocate.
Maria, do we have subcommittee members on the Zoom?
We don't.
Okay, wow, great, thank you for all the participation here. Let me say a couple things before we get started, or as we get started. So first and foremost, everyone has the draft, yes, the electronic copy, the hard copy is in the corner here. This represents an incredible amount of hard work, collaborative work, expert work, weekend work, evening work. I don't even want to know if you were doing this track changes, say version number, what you got to. But I just want to start by thanking everybody who has put real sweat equity into this draft. I know the first thing you will all say is it's not done, it's not perfect, there's more to do, all true. But let's just see how far it's come in, gosh, 3 weeks since we saw it last?
Yeah.
So, yeah. It really is an incredible body of work, and I know that will be a good meeting today. I am called away to other meetings downtown very shortly, so I will be leaving you in the good hands of Carrie Graham, as well as my colleague Joe Rodriguez at CDA will be sliding in at some point to help you tag team. He's rearranging his day to make that work, so Joe will be with you, and you're in good hands, as you know. A couple things I wanted to say to you all just about where we are as you start your discussion and review. So just on next steps, I know you're going to go over process in a second, but one of the questions I think people probably have is, what is the Stakeholder Advisory Committee going to do with this report? And there is a call tomorrow of a small group of them who are going to have that process conversation about SAC. You know, are they voting, consenting, accepting, editing? So they are thinking about that as well, and so hopefully we'll know more shortly, but that is, we want to know that before we sit down on March 2nd. So that is in the works for that conversation tomorrow. And then, of course, the report will be presented to SAC next Wednesday on a webinar just for presentation and clarification. And then the real discussion and action will happen at the regularly scheduled full in-person SAC meeting Monday, March 2nd. So that's kind of the next 3 steps of SAC: process, the briefing, and then the discussion and action. two things I wanted to remind you, although I know you all are doing it, is the coordination. The wonderful thing, those of you who heard the State of the States, we have no shortage of bold ideas and bold leadership, and so there's many things happening in this space right now. And just to remind you of the Cal-AIM coordination, a very important meeting on Monday, 2/24, about LTSS and Medicaid, Healthier California Medicaid for All? Close? Medi-Cal for All? Close. All right, I'm working on it. But that meeting is Monday. So that's a very important point of coordination. And another key partner is the Governor's Alzheimer's Task Force, which has invited the master plan to join on March 30th. So there will be even more discussion about dementia and all dementias and how Alzheimer's is in the master plan. So great that those things are in your report, and we will continue to keep coordinating across those two places. But before I go, I want to leave you with, or maybe reflect back to you questions that have been asked to you and about this report from other parts of this many-headed process. Here are questions I've heard, and I want to make sure that you continue to keep them in your mind as you're thinking today. One is from our last SAC meeting. I remember them saying, "What are your big ideas?" Who else remembers that conversation? Yeah. There was a big idea question. So I think, remember that question has been asked of you. Last week we had the first equity work group meeting, and Donna Benton and Catherine Blakemore were there as members of the equity work group, and Susan Damaris and Sarah Steenhausen and Lydia Missalides were all there presenting the report. And one of the questions that was asked is, how will this report be relevant to my family and my community? There were many other questions asked, but that one really stuck with me. Is this even relevant to my family and my community? And then I will do my level best to channel the third set of questions, which my bosses will say is, what are your priorities?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Patty.
What are they going to cost?
Yes. So you can imagine the administration is very interested in not just a comprehensive, multi-year, multi-factored, multi-sector plan, but what are the priorities? Yeah. So those are the questions that I would reflect back to you that I know you've been asked in other forums, and just don't necessarily have to have answers to all of them by 4:59, but to have them in your mind as you're thinking about the next steps in this process. Any questions or comments? Patty?
Well, yes, thanks. Because I had said when we came in, after I read this, we absolutely have to come up with some priorities, and I don't want the SAC to be the only body that does that. I think we need to have some input into what the priorities should be. One of the things that I was concerned about initially is we didn't have any times on these. So it's by 2030, blah, 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 blah. I said, can't do by 2030. The governor will be gone by 2030. We have to look at timelines. That is part is talking priorities in terms of timelines. So by 2002, by 2001, we have two things in there by 2001. But we need to, when we come up with priorities, then we have to timeline those by 2005 or by whatever. Because the cost factor in this is humongous. And we're not at the top of priorities in the legislature or with this governor. Homelessness, he got a 15-minute standing ovation today talking about homelessness, for heaven's sakes. Not that it isn't. You know, it's very important everywhere in the state of California, but I'm just saying, we are not the #1 priority. So that's another reason we have to come up with priorities and costs. And by when. Okay, thanks, hon. Karen?
Thank you. First of all, I have to say, I've just been honored to be part of this group. I'm so in such great respect for people around the table, so thank you. These recommendations are incredible. And I counted up, there are 130 recommendations.
Yes.
Good for you.
Thank you. I counted them. That's who I am. It's just, good job. That's all you need to know about. Good. And I completely agree with what's been said here, because, 130 recommendations, there are a lot of recommendations.
Yes.
And so I wrote down like my top, and I was gonna say 5, but then I got to 10, and then I got to 6, because it needs to be coordinated. But I definitely think for me, that I would agree that we should prioritize, but that's gonna be a challenge, because my priorities are from where I sit, right?
Right.
And there's how many of us around the room?
130, no.
130. So I appreciate that. I just wanted to point those things out, because I think that the prioritization for me is really important. I have mine that are really based on local issues. But I think that we need to have that conversation. And I also want to just mention that I completely lost, when I was reading it again, any discussion. I was talking to Kim this morning about this, the whole lack of services and support and funding for cognitive disabilities, cognitive impairment. So I want to make sure, maybe I'm missing it in the document out of the 130, but I just wanted to say that.
I don't want to cut off too much, but I do want to, the planners for this meeting have planned every one of those conversations, that they want to review the process, you want to review the content, and you want to have these discussions about priorities and consensus. So I don't mean to get out of order and hijack. I think this is a conversation you're absolutely intending to have. Are there so can we, with anything else that feels burning to say now, or else we'll go back to the regularly scheduled agenda and start the discussion? And then I would be remiss if I didn't also, those of you who don't know, we had a webinar Wednesday this morning about emergency and disaster preparedness, and it just occurred to me now that 2 of the 3 presenters are here. So, and Karen both presented this morning and are in a committee meeting. So we really have hijacked your entire day today. So thank you very much. We know all of you. Yes, apparently so. Any other questions or clarification or comments I can provide? Again, you have everything you need right here in this room and on the Zoom, but,
Everyone put more lights in the room?
that is a great, I have no idea.
That was atmospheric.
I like the atmosphere.
Like
Let there be light, says Christina.
Someone had a good idea.
All right, so the metaphor has been created. We're now going to shine brighter lights. Yes, and I'll hand it over to Carrie.
Okay, and we'll go to meeting logistics.
All right.
All right, everyone, so, we have a slide up about the meeting logistics, and I think everyone knows the drill by this point, but we have all the, materials should be posted online, and all of you should, there's also printed out copies of the report and things here in the room, and, there is simultaneous captioning is available, maybe not in the room.
Yes.
Oh,
Or
okay.
remotely.
Or at least remotely.
Great, thank you.
So our meeting agenda today, and we're going to let should I call you guys the writers, the captains? We'll be going through this. But we're going to have a review of the process from Lydia. We're also going to have a time where everybody gets to make their reflection. So I think we decided everybody gets 2 minutes to say, you've looked at the report, what do you think are the most important things about the report, just any reflections you have, things you want to make sure we talk about in this meeting, anything you want to say. And should we do 2 minutes each?
Up to 2.
Up to 2, okay, and I'm going to be timing, so everyone's going to hate me after this. There'll be a consensus discussion about the content of the report. We'll have a break, and we're going to be talking about certain goals that may be referred to, certain recommendations that might be referred to other goals, and you have a list of those. And then around 4:30, we'll be doing public comment and next steps. All right, the next thing is where we have been. This doesn't show all the meetings. It starts with meeting 6, because there's just not room on the slide anymore. We are sort of at meeting 9, but that's not really true, right? I mean, we've been, there's a lot of between meeting discussion. So we're at meeting 9, where we're reviewing the stakeholder report. This is in preparation for February 26th, where it's the sneak peek to the SAC committee, where this committee will give an overview of the report to SAC so that they can begin thinking, cogitating, discussing among themselves. And then they will have their meeting on March 2nd, where they will review and discuss the LTSS report. And all of you are welcome to dial in or come to that meeting in person to listen to what they say. We then have another meeting, March 2nd, between March 2nd and March 10th is kind of a not sure what's happening there, and then on March 10th is another in-person meeting for this group. And this group will review anything that the SAC, any kind of SAC feedback on the LTSS report. You're also going to hear an update at that point, moving into a different realm and some cross-pollination on the research subcommittee. And thank you, Donna, and a group from the research subcommittee that's been working on Goal 1 dashboard research agenda around LTSS. Will be coming to do a report out and begin our discussion with you about the dashboard and research agenda around LTSS. So keep your ideas and recommendations that have to do with data and evaluation for that meeting. And then we will keep working April through June to inform and advise the state plan on an ongoing basis. All right. Our AARP meeting guidelines, start and end on time. One person speaks at a time. Be fully present, fully disengaged from electronic devices, which is easy for me because I can't get on Wi-Fi. And use respectful language and tone and assume good intentions. All right, without further ado, we will hand it over to Lydia, who's going to be talking about the review of the process.
Okay, we're getting ourselves a little better situated here. Many papers. Okay, thanks everyone. Great to be here, Lydia Missilides. Going to orient you to the report that's in front of you today so you can understand the logic and what things were added, our thought process being the editing team, and give you that sort of overview. So that'll then lead into a discussion. I think I'll answer some of your questions as well. So first want to thank all the captains and everyone on this subcommittee for all their thoughtful recommendations. This has been an intense effort, and I want to also acknowledge Kim's remarks this morning. We did take those into our hearts as we were working over this last 5 or 6 days very intensely on taking all of your recommendations and your reflections, Kim, about what we needed to reflect in this report, which, by the way, as Maya continues to remind us, is an iterative process. So this is not the last and final report. We will we have scheduled time to work this weekend on edits that we know are coming from today's discussion, your thoughts over the next 2 days and going forward. So I wanted to share with you how we arrived at this draft. So if you could bring the draft you have in front of you forward and follow along, I think that'll be the easiest way. The report is?
Can we put the report on the screen, do you think, or should we not?
Dr. Maria, are you able to hard copy the document?
Yeah. So let me start with some introductory comments. So the editing team was Susan, Sarah, myself, with Claire's help. Catherine was on call for us over the weekend while she was relaxing in Mammoth Lakes. And a number of you also got emails and calls from us over the weekend, so we thank all of you. We worked really intensely. It really did require in-person meetings to get this together because we had to discuss a lot of structure and make some editorial decisions that you'll hear about here in a moment. So we estimated that just since about Wednesday or Thursday, we put in 2 weeks of woman hours into the second draft, just to give you an idea of volunteer efforts. And that doesn't include, one of these days is a thought exercise. I think I'm going to try to add up everybody's time in this subcommittee
that has contributed to this, and then we can't even add up the comments and the recommendations that came from the public.
The next slide, actually, is before we get to your objectives.
Well, we know how many of those, we don't know how much time went into all of those. So, I mean, this has been an amazing effort. So the intense timeline we are under required some pretty intense focus. So we actually sat at my dining table over the last weekend. You can picture us there with the Labrador puppy and people walking in and out and workers digging up the water meters in front of my house. But it was really, for me personally, a pleasure to be able to work with my colleagues on this that intensely, and we look forward to your thoughts and feedback today, and we'll talk in a minute about what's the best way for the subcommittee to get us some feedback for the next round of edits. And I want to also thank Kim for your leadership, because you put a lot of faith in this subcommittee process that many of us are experiencing for the first time in this way, working with the state. So we want to thank you for your trust in this effort. So one of the things that Kim said was be bold. We've also heard be brief. Be clear and compelling, and I'll add to that, and prioritize. So that means that as editors here, we did have to make decisions not only about working out report language for clarity and brevity, but also keeping our focus on the charge of the subcommittee, which is LTSS. And we do understand, and we all know this, that LTSS is just one aspect of what a person needs in their life, and that goals 2, 3, and 4 are encompassing other needs. And so that is why we'll talk to you today about recommendations that we recommend to you. We refer to the other work groups that are working on goals 2, 3, and 4. The other thing I wanted to share, we talked yesterday, is that we would like to make a recommendation to our colleagues here, our subcommittee colleagues, and also to Kim, that it might help with the process going forward with the other work groups that one member, at least from our subcommittee, be assigned to sit in with the work groups for goal 2, 3, and 4, particularly if you agree that some recommendations should get referred there, and we want to be sure we shepherd those through those goals. So think about that. So here's the guidelines we decided on for editing. Clarity. So we tried to use plain language as much as possible. I kind of jokingly call it de-wonkify the report. I know we weren't completely successful with that. It's very hard to do when we're all working in this kind of world, but I feel like we did make some steps toward that, particularly with renaming our 5 objectives. Boldness, that helped us reframe the 5 objectives that are in the report, and Claire's thinking really helped us kind of zero in on how we might reframe those 5 objectives and putting them in plain language that the public could understand and that we could remember easily. So that's another reason why the government structure, we got an email from Ellen this morning who's on vacation and sends her best, wondering why it was our number 1 objective moved to number 5. And that's because we didn't think that for impact and for the general public that we lead with government reorganization. So you'll see now that it's still there, but it's number 5 instead of number 1. Brevity, we started out with almost 50 pages in this report, and that's without some of the introductory sections. And you'll see now we're down to, I think, 28. And that's with now some new introductory language that I'll highlight for you in a moment. And we wanted the report to be an active voice as much as possible and use action verbs. So if we missed any of that, we'll catch those on the next edit. So the way we started out is we regrouped the recommendations into the 5 objective areas that are reordered now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we do have a crosswalk. I actually brought my older version with old numbers in it, so if anyone really needs to find out where their recommendation landed, I've got that here. We tried to stay focused on LTSS, reducing repetition, so some recommendations have been sort of collapsed into one rather than being distinct and separate. There was some repetition that started to get confusing to read. We tried to focus on the what and not so much on the how, although there's still a lot of how in the report. And we didn't want to make any decisions about removing hows because some of those hows are very important and then could help us with
Patty's suggestion perhaps about the prioritization and budget. And then lastly, so two more things. Our goal is to edit but not lose the intent of the recommendation. So if we did lose intent somewhere as you read through it and something that you wrote, please let us know, because that was not our intention. Our intention was to, again, consolidate, be clear, succinct, and use plain language. And then anywhere there was a 2030 date, we took it out because we didn't really think that was useful at this point until, if we are going to timeline, and I don't know if our charge is to do that, but if we are going to timeline, we didn't want that to be in the report at this time. So all those references, there might be one or two left in there because they kind of made sense, yeah. Karen noted we had 130 separate recommendations. Pretty impressive. So now, if you wanted, I'll just go really quickly to orient you to the report. The introduction is pretty much the same as the January 27th version. We did do some reordering of the topics. And the introduction is by why the subcommittee exists. Then the vision, still at page 1, stayed roughly the same. We just moved it earlier up into the report. Leadership on page 2, if you'll turn to that, is a new statement that was inspired by one of those dining room moments when we were saying, darn it, like Patty always says, you know, we've not had a high priority in the larger scheme of things for all these years, and we have a moment right now, we have an opportunity, but it's going to take leadership from everyone, starting from the top down. So we'd love for you to read these few paragraphs and give us your comments on this. So this is part of sort of leading into why this report exists and why it's important. And then at the bottom of page 2, the importance of gubernatorial leadership. Oh, sure. Christina, quick question on the formatting. Yeah, go ahead.
In the vision section,
Yeah.
when it says, the subcommittee affirms the values set forth in the framework, what is that NPA framework?
The Stakeholder Advisories Committee, Master Plan on Aging, statements of values.
Framework of the committee.
So it's in the bigger committee structure?
When it says, I want to live where I can.
It's part of that document.
Okay, so I.
Should that be made clear?
Well, otherwise it's like, I don't know that folks would know that.
Okay, all right, good.
Okay.
Okay.
And then why are these as bullets, why are these 2 bullets here? Like, it doesn't flow exactly.
Okay, got it, okay. And you know, we'll take those kind of edits, like formatting and so on.
But I guess I'm asking more, is there a reason why it's bulleted? Is it different than?
No, I think that was just the way it was originally, and we didn't edit that down. So I appreciate that, yeah. Yeah, this is really good for you guys to read this with fresh eyes, so we appreciate that. Yeah, our eyes are a little unfresh right now. So thank you for that. So leadership, we just commented on importance of gubernatorial leadership. That is also new. So take a look at that.
I would add in that, though, in terms of, you need to, you say the legislature further down, but next to the governor, it's the legislature. Everything that is a bill is going to have to go through that group, signed by him at the end,
Okay.
so it needs to be mentioned.
Okay, thank you for that reminder. Yes, Nina, go ahead.
And this is where I
Shut
can
up.
send you some language, so ARP is about to produce some research on the many contributions, volunteerism, caregiving work, spending of older Californians. And so we want to really highlight, this isn't just about older Californians and persons with disabilities need things. We also contribute.
Yeah.
So we want to infuse a conversation with that here and in the major report.
Excellent.
When will that be available?
Are we going to do edits as we go along, or
Yeah.
how do you want it?
Yeah, we'll,
Maybe you guys, can I just have, why don't we let
Lydia get through her introduction, and then we have a couple other things that we need to go through. We need to talk about like the inputs that went into this and timeline, and then we go to our reflection.
Yes, and then I think the process for getting us edits too will be really helpful, because, I know you guys have some good thoughts. Equity, we added that little box that, we found that ties discrimination with biological aging. So, that may, if you all like that, that seemed to fit in with that equity statement. I know we'll get feedback from the equity, work group on the report. So this is kind of a placeholder for further edits to come, I'm sure. Page 3 now I'm on, we added the scope of the report, just changed the title. Page 4, we condensed the LTSS definition, and the longer definition is in the report itself, and we'll put it at the end in an appendix. And then we started at the bottom of page 4 with our objective summary, and those are the renamed objective names. So then the next couple of pages are just a concise summary of each of those big themes, the 5 big ideas. And then we go into, starting with, I have an older version of this report, it's at page 8 with the actual detailed recommendations. Yeah, page 7. Mm-hmm. So that's the framework of how the report is laid out. I want to just let you know what we're still anticipating will be added. There's a graphic that AARP has graciously donated again to edit and submit to us for our consideration that'll match up with the recommendations and objectives we have now, or rather the objectives. It'll be a little simpler. We're going to pull out, Sarah's already gone through and pulled out quotes from the public, and so we're envisioning we might add some pull-out boxes with quotes that relate to the subject matter in the report, kind of sprinkle those throughout, and possibly some photos. Again, we're trying to keep the report not be too long, but we also want it to be compelling and readable, so I think those are important.
Is the person infused?
Throughout, yeah. And then we have to confirm a few data points that are in there, and we'll add an appendix that'll have a definition of terms and a list of subcommittee members and possibly the referred recommendations after today once we arrive at consensus on that. And as we mentioned, we'll be doing more editing from subcommittee recos as well as any other items that we receive from the public between now and Friday. Is that right, Carrie? Okay.
There's going to be more public comment through Friday. And close the business.
So more public comment through Friday. And subcommittee members, we would love to have your comments and edits by then as well.
So can we go to the input slide, because we want to... All right, so we just wanted to take a moment to kind of reflect on everything that's gone into this report so far. We have about 800 plus public comments, a lot of them having to do with LTSS, some of them more general. We have 200 plus public recommendations that were looked at and considered for this report. We have had 11 LTSS subcommittee meetings on different deep dives on different LTSS topics with expert presentations. State partners and different state agencies were involved in every single one of those meetings and gave input. We had, research subcommittee has started to think and review data dashboard and research agenda related to LTSS. And finally, just last week, the new equity work group. Carmen, do you want to come up for a second? Can you raise your hand? I know Donna's on equity work group. Who else is on equity? Catherine's on equity work group. So we just want to take a moment and tell you what's happening with that. I want to introduce you to Carmen, who's going to quickly talk about what kind of the equity lens that we're trying to pivot towards. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Carmen Gibbs. I work here over at CDA. I'm the senior staff counsel moonlighting as one of the work group members. It's been a wonderful experience. I have a history of working with nonprofit organizations. I worked for California Legal Assistance, which is a legal aid organization throughout California, primarily in housing discrimination. And then when I started with state service, one of the first tasks I had, well, actually, not one of the first, but one of the most important was working on the Government Alliance of Race and Equity in doing that. So we hope to bring that to CDA as well. And so this is just in line with my passion. And so I'm really, really grateful and humbled that I am able to be on the equity work group. We had a wonderful meeting last Thursday. It was great. It was productive. A lot of people they meaningfully participated. And so it was a privilege. So I can just give a really brief update of what we talked about at the meeting. We looked at the LTSS framework not before the report came out, but people had some really good feedback, and rather than bog us down right now with that, because I know you have a lot of work to do, I just want to give you some of the high-level questions that we want you to think about while looking at the report. And this is just as a preface, please, this is just a work in progress. And so we're still trying to develop an equity tool, because everything that we do that comes out of this equity work group, we're going to try to put that lens on the whole MPA report, beginning, middle, and end, which is a huge task. So we're just trying to figure out what kind of tool can we make to make this more objective. And so some of the questions that we were thinking about are, what are the most significant challenges facing racially and ethnically diverse communities, immigrant communities, LGBTQ plus communities, and women in accessing equality and LTSS today? How are these challenges addressed in the report? What disparities exist in access to and quality of LTSS for racially and ethnically diverse communities, immigrant communities, LGBTQ plus communities, and women, and how are these disparities addressed? What are the systemic inequities that have created these disparities? Are the proposed recommendations responsive? How are they responsive? Referring to the old graphic that we now know is being revamped, are we at full equity, or what do we still need to do to get there? And how do the recommendations need to be changed so they can be responsive if we are not at full equity? Do the proposed recommendations create any new or exacerbate any existing inequities or disparities? So again, these are just things to think about while we're writing our recommendations, or while you're writing your recommendations. How, if at all, are the unique needs of racially and ethnically diverse communities, immigrant communities, LGBTQ plus communities, and women addressed in the recommendations? And something that I was really heartened by that I heard talked about are, what are the assets and strengths of these diverse communities, and how are we reflecting that in the findings and in the report? So it seems like the cross-pollination is already happening. It's already working. We talked a little bit about different language, culturally responsive language in the MPA, and just various recommendations for the LTSS Subcommittee, which we will bring to you after we've had some more input. I don't know if Donna or Catherine want to talk about their experience with it, or if I've captured it all.
I would say you really captured it.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Who are you asking those questions of the committee, the members?
Oh, good question. So, say your question.
Okay, sorry. The questions you just asked, who are you asking those questions of? Members of the committee?
Yes, it would be members, the questions of the members. So this is, when we're looking at a report, any kind of document or any kind of recommendation, we have to look at it with the equity lens as of, are we really addressing, is this going to be really a report for all, for California for all? Is it going to be responsive? So it is for the committee members, but it's also just a point of reflection, and so this is gonna happen not just with LTSS, but every goal, any kind of recommendations that's going to form the MTA.
Yeah.
What I wanted, the comment I have is, Karen Lincoln is on your committee.
Correct.
She is absolutely fabulous, in my opinion, and has done a lot of research in terms of the African-American community, specifically as it relates to receiving or not receiving services and why that is. She's done really good work in the African-American community, and that should be brought in too. And I don't know in terms of the other folks that you've got on this committee, if they have done extensive looking into the communities, or if they're just talking off the top of their head. But Karen's not just talking off the top of her head, she's done work.
Yeah, she's on the committee.
I know she is, I'm really glad she's on the committee.
Karen and then Marty, or Marty then Karen.
Marty Moto, CDCAN, and appreciate your presentation. I have a follow-up question to Patty, to who this is addressed to, and they're good questions. First of all, I would slightly disagree with the intent of the question of when will we achieve equity, because I don't believe we ever will. It's an ongoing function. It's sort of like when will we achieve disability rights. It's something we have to fight for, and maybe the fight is different every year and every month, but it's not, you're not going to ever reach to say that we're victorious. But I think the key question, and I agree with the idea that everything that we do should be, there should be a lens of how does it reduce or achieve equity, or, you know. But I think what's missing, and one of the things that we need to do is, what are the tools in any of these recommendations we make that will help measure the questions you were asking? Because it's important to ask the question, but we need tools that measure the outcome. So we may say, for instance, one of the recommendations that we have here, this across the board that actually will help people with communities of color, for instance, the reduction, eliminating the permanent reduction to IHSS, for instance. Except we don't know how that impacts specifically communities of color or the workers.
Right.
I mean, we need to drill down sometimes on some of the recommendations that we assume will help everyone, and then drill down how will it help certain types of Californians. And it goes back to Nina, your other point too, by the way, about we need to address all these different communities of older Californians and make sure their names are, they can identify that, oh, I'm there. But outcomes and measuring, and also defining what are the outcomes, because the state and federal government generally looks at outcomes in units of either hours, cost, but never about the outcome of the individual in terms of their personal, individualized needs. Do they get their needs or whatever? So I love the fact that you raised those points as the work group, but we need to actually drill down and get the right tools so that we can measure what we're doing.
Karen.
Thank you. Very briefly, I was wondering if the group is looking at or can look at the impact of public charge on equity. Simple question. Charge, did you say?
Oh, my God.
It was brought up.
Good.
Yep. We have a lot of,
Good time.
My name is Peter Mendoza. I'm a consumer representative and a user of LTSS. I really like the equity piece, but I also think we should call out marginalized communities, people, communities of color, LGBTQ, the folks in the gender community, who particularly anticipate or experience isolation and the lack of services in their communities. And I really think that there needs to be some strong language that really covers that, because we in independent living and other agencies work hard to serve those communities who often don't get served by other agencies and don't have family or a lot of friends who work.
question about whether the equity piece of the equity lens also applies to the workforce that's serving, applies to everything.
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
And
Recommendations in here about that.
Good. All right, well, thank you, Carmen, for being here.
you're welcome.
And, we'll continue to have
Cross-pollination.
pollination.
I think we should get
Equity on the slide.
Okay.
I will just say this one thing, every comment that you've all made, I'm really heartened that that was actually discussed in the equity work group meeting last week. So I just want to let you know that. So, thank you.
Not commenting on equity, but on the
Okay.
slide about input, if this is gonna be used for presentation to the staff or for any other purpose, I would encourage you to add the CDSS listening sessions on IHSS and the things activities. They spend a lot of time.
Good.
A lot of
Right.
effort on that.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, back to Lydia.
Okay, where are we now?
Where are we?
Yeah. Where are we?
Slide forward one, we're at, if you want to go over the timeline, or did you already go over that? We're just a little.
Okay. Yeah, I think the next thing is the timeline. So, I don't have it in front of me, and I don't have my glasses on, let's see. So Carrie, I think you should do this.
Okay.
That is not bright enough for me to see it from this distance.
Okay.
So give it back to her.
This is just a writing timeline. The check marks show, where we've been and what's coming up. We have possibly another round of edits between this meeting and the 24th. And we already went over that we are presenting to SAC on the 26th, SAC's meeting on the 2nd. And we're just not sure what's happening between the 2nd and the 6th. It really depends on what SAC asks for. They could say, okay, thank you, rubber stamping the report. Or they could say, come back and give us 5 big ideas, or who knows. So that the 2nd through the 6th is kind of up in the air. And then, as we mentioned, there'll be another meeting of you guys on the 10th. That's it.
Who's presenting to the staff on the second? And Susan?
No, we're not presenting to SAC on the 2nd, did I say that? We're
Yes.
presenting to SAC on the 26th.
As a webinar.
As a webinar. And then on the 2nd, you'll be there, but it should be that you've presented the whole report on the 26th by webinar, or do you present again?
Not everybody's gonna be at the webinar, so it's
Oh,
getting
got it. Okay,
high-level presentation.
sorry, okay.
I don't know.
So another high-level presentation, but not as in-depth as the 26th, and then they discuss.
Who's presenting on the 26th? You're doing that through webinar?
Gotten that
We
far.
haven't gotten that far yet.
That's days away, Patty.
This is just in time, just in time
I
writing.
know where I'm gonna be in 2 hours.
Okay. Next slide, please. I don't know where the clicker went.
We got it.
And then these are the report objectives, and then let's go to reflections. So why don't we say that, Sarah, I'm gonna hand Susan, sorry. And the microphone to you, and you tell people what to do.
Okay. So I'm one of 4 daughters, Shannon, Sean, Susan, and Sarah. So working on this with Sarah, and Susan and Sarah, I keep getting, it reminds me of home, growing up.
Okay.
So the reflections point, one of the strengths of this report is everybody had a hand in it, with the different subcommittees and the writing teams, and we thought it would be helpful to just spend a minute, because I wouldn't say we've been siloed, but a chance for everybody to just share, whether it's about the process or the content, a minute or two, your thoughts and reflections before we start pulling it apart in the next section. So why don't we start?
Oh, no, I don't want to go first.
Okay.
Or there's Peter, too.
Peter. We can start with Peter. We just would like to hear where you are with the report, or if there's something you want to rise up as we head into the afternoon discussion.
Is everyone okay? I'll stop you after 2 minutes, just to.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we'll be,
Yeah.
the whole afternoon.
I'll be short, I apologize for anything, I have a budget issue today. You know, I think the process has been really well, and I really think the team worked really well. The various teams worked well to really discuss a lot of complex issues where there wasn't always agreement, and really trying to develop consensus. There are still things in the report that we need to flush out. Like, for example, in a number of plans that we make recommendations regarding in-home support services, those recommendations could also go through, other, direct care programs, examples of the regional center. So we should try to find a way to sort of make that point, because all of us should use long-term services and support, whether it's IHSS or other services. Our care staff is experiencing many of the same issues, with backup service, pay inequity. So we need to really make that clear that it's not just an IHSS problem. I'm gonna give a shout out to, one of my PCAs here, Chief. He does a lot of great work for me, so I get everywhere. And he's especially important today, because I'm not feeling like that. So
sorry.
I just want to acknowledge, we need to acknowledge the folks who support us as we do our work. Sorry, Chief, for putting you on the spot. My apologies. You can yell at me later.
Okay, thank you, Peter.
139.
Well, first of all, I have a long history with Sarah, for about 20 years, and she's worked with me on 2 master plans. A long history with Olivia and also with Susan, both who were involved in the second master plan. And I trust the 3 of them implicitly. The biggest thing for me, because it's the thing that didn't happen in the restructuring plan that came out of the Senate in 2015, is the restructure, is a new department. To me, there's nothing more important than that to start with, because it's got to be somebody at the helm that's going to pull this stuff together. So, I didn't like seeing it at the end of the report. I liked it as part of the first part because of, oh my God, is it gone? As I was reading through the report. I mean, I understand politically why you did it, but I don't want us to think that is not a crucial big issue versus services. I mean, the cost of all of these things, that's what scares me. When I went through, and Karen, only I would have gone through 2 and counted 130 recommendations from it. So, and I'm going, oh my God, how are we going to pay for this? We're not a priority on the legislative list. I don't think we're a priority on the governor's list either. So we're really going to have to work hard to make anything happen. But first and foremost, we have to have a structure as leading. And this is going to be complicated. Putting the disabled and the aging community together is going to be complicated. I mean, it's going to be complicated. It just is. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you.
So first of all, I really want to thank, the folks who just put so many hours into this. I put a few hours, but now nothing compared to working, weekends upon weekends, and, really huge debt of, gratitude. But I think everybody had said, someone said, everybody had an hand in this.
Absolutely.
So, really want to thank the entire group. So from where I sit, so I sit in a very particular place. What I worry about, and just building on Patty's comments about, there's a lot of competition for priorities and for funding. I worry we haven't been strategic enough. And what I mean by that is, and I'm talking about Medicaid, but look where the money is. The governor and the legislature, the governor in particular, have already made statements about their priorities because they put money behind it. So they put $1.4 billion into, Medi-Cal, whatever it's called, Healthier California for All. I learned last week, there was a meeting around, with the plans around the program. They the governor has budgeted $610 million for infrastructure funding,
Yeah,
to encourage plans to build infrastructure. Now, what are those infrastructures gonna be? I mean, we should be shaping that. And, you know, that's money that's already been set aside. You know, we don't, so how do we shape that to really focus on the LTSS needs? The county is very worried about whole person care funding, replacing that. And that is, in the meetings that I've heard about, that is the thing that's getting airtime, not LTSS.
no.
So, I just think we need to be more strategic about where we are, where the governor has put his priorities, already as demonstrated, and trying to get stronger connections in the entire Medicaid program with LTSS. So, you know, work in progress. That's my main reflection. So, but first of all, thank you. I think it's a great report, and it's a great start.
Thank you. Reiterating significant appreciation to Susan, Lydia, and Sarah. All hail
Claire,
the three ladies.
everyone, yeah.
And let's just say women get it done.
Claire.
Just saying.
And Claire.
And Claire, I'm sorry. So I wanted I have several things to say, so I'll talk really fast. I want to point out, the Department of Social Services issued a draft ACL last week that proposes to no longer have state contribution towards non-health benefits that are negotiated in contracts with IHSS workers. So what are non-health benefits? Sorry?
A little farther away.
Sorry. What are non-health health benefits are things like training.
Like what?
Yeah, I didn't know.
I'm trying to talk fast, we only have 2 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry. The Department of Social Services issued a draft all-county letter, which they do all the time, and they solicit feedback. This particular one proposes to no longer have the state contribute toward, so when I say state contribution, I mean the matching funds that are
Paid for, okay.
towards the costs that are of non-health benefits negotiated in union contracts with the IHSS workers.
And federal funding too.
And that also impacts federal funding.
Like training.
Things like training, travel vouchers,
Oh,
pension, I mean, there's only one county that does something like that. Vacation, holiday, so it completely contradicts what we're trying to do here.
You're right.
Because I can assure you that if the state and the feds no longer participate in helping fund it, it ain't gonna happen. So I am almost like baffled. Why are we doing this? This is, we are acknowledging we need to retain and recruit. We don't need to not give people benefits. It's the opposite of what we're trying to do. The reason I'm raising it is entirely, I think, what Maya and Patty are saying, which is it's not a priority. You know, and I don't say it in that it's malicious, I just think it's not being thought about in the type of comprehensive, collaborative way of, on the one hand, we're doing the master plan for aging, on the other hand, we're just going to implement this policy that makes no kind of sense at all, maybe because someone in finance told us to do it. Probably that's what it was, right? You know, what was the origin of that? So I just want to raise that, and I approach this very much from a lobbying perspective. I love Patty's suggestion in terms of the recommendations. My feeling is we need to make them way more specific in terms of the who, how, you know, broad, like, you know, prioritize, blah, 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 like, whatever the hell that means, right? So my leaning is specifically who should do it, when should they do it, how should they do it, add, I love this, add a timeline. I would even add a category, does this require legislative action? Can this be done through administrative action only? Because that will then inform the legislature what role they play in all of these things. And then even something like requires funding, yes or no? Or, you know, will produce state savings, yes or no? Or something to that effect. The reason being is when you deal with the legislature, and I don't say this in any terrible way, and Patty, give me a course correction. When you deal with the legislature, you have to make it as simple as possible. Of course. What exactly do you want us to do? Otherwise, you're just talking, and everyone else is talking, and it's meaningless.
That's right.
So let's turn this into a here legislature, everything that's color-coded green, that's what we want you to do. And look, we have trimable language that actually does it. All you need to do is put your name on it, and they'll be like, yes, let's do it, we'll move it tomorrow. Okay, thank you, I'm 10 seconds over. Thank you.
Oh, is that what you were showing? Marty Emoto, CD Can family member. First of all, I do want to emphasize that women do get it done. My ex-wife constantly reminds me of that. I just want to say, first of all, to thank everyone for the work. Many of you, we've worked together before, but it's been really meaningful. And so as a family member, and my older sister had developmental disability, she died in her 50s. My father was left in his 80s to help provide supports along with me because my mother had been passed. And when I look at this report, I always kind of think, what difference would this have made in my sister's life or my father's life? In addition to what things would matter to the people and the families that I talk to or come in contact with, or the people with disabilities, or those who are just going through really difficult times and they're older. And I'm struggling with that part because to Christina's point, I don't see anything that tomorrow, everything we tell them is not going to happen tomorrow, but for my father, for my sister, for all these other families, when? And it shouldn't be something that's always in the future that is not reachable. For my sister, it's too late. For my father, it's too late. How many other families look at this and they're going to think, it's going to be too late for me? And Susan, you know this from dealing with your families. And I think whatever we do next needs to provide something meaningful to the people we're talking about. And to the point Patty and Christina and others have made about we're not the state's priority and how do we make it easier for the state to actually act on this, and the state means the legislature, is we don't have to be the number one priority in the governor's state of the state or the budget. What we have to do is put our advocacy hats on. Christina, so you made a good point, is make it easy. And I think it's like we talk about integrating healthcare services. We need to integrate these recommendations into everything. So if there's housing proposals or whatever else, we need to put ourselves right in there, okay? Thank you.
Karen, Sonoma County. I used some of my comment time earlier when I didn't know we were going to go through this, so thank you. I think that I'm not as worried about funding because the state can't afford to not do this. And I think that we need to show that this is a priority. IHSS saves Medicaid, Medi-Cal dollars from the state level. It shifts the funding from the feds to the state to the local areas. We can't afford not to do this and to be more specific because it would probably impact a lot of things, including the workforce issues that we talk about and other things if we take some of these recommendations. I like adding more specificity to it. I like the priorities, as I've already mentioned. Much like Christina said, we can indicate it, not necessarily have to rejig the whole thing, but like a menu that has a chili pepper to show the hot items, maybe we can do that. I love that. Chili pepper kitchen.
Likewise, I've always liked the idea of being able to identify things that can be accomplished more in a short term, things that are longer term. I think that would be an important addition. The other thing that I've noticed is that in the recommendations and the backup papers, there's a bunch of things that say former workers to talk about blah, blah, blah. So it seems like we've got some things in the parking lot, but we have the expertise here in the room. And I think that, that there makes more sense to me to use the relationships and the knowledge of the experts that are here in this room to try to tackle some of the things that we just frankly have in a parking lot because we didn't have time to figure out. Then to have a whole new group selected and then for them to figure out what their work plan is gonna be. So I would encourage a consideration of that.
So, Catherine Blakemore, I actually agree with what Karen just said in trying to figure out the solutions for as many of these as we can. And I say that in part because what I've really come to respect about this group is the collaborative nature of the work and the creative problem solving. And different than a lot of other groups, people are not really dug into what they think initially they want to have happen. So there is sort of this opportunity with this group of people, I think, to build on that collaboration and try and come up with solutions that just take longer for somebody else to do. The other thing I want to, I guess two things. One is I like the idea we want to be bold in this. I will note, however, that our boldness begins like on page 7. And so I feel like that's such a lost opportunity, and the governor knows how we got here, because that is his executive order, so it's fine to include the background, but the boldness of what is it we want to see on page 7, half the people aren't going to get past page 3, they're going to go, yeah, another report, tells us what happened, that kind of thing. So I just encourage moving up the bold things to the very beginning and setting the stage that way. And then when we have time, there was this interesting idea that emerged over the weekend about creating a statutory right to long-term services and support, which I think is really good. When I read this, it looks like it's turned into a Medi-Cal right to services and support.
There's a reason for that, we'll talk about it.
Well,
I mean, we'll discuss it.
but it is not bold when you do that, because I will tell you legally, I think there already is a right to Medicaid services and support, so you haven't achieved it.
Okay.
See, that was our not bugging you again over the weekend.
Yeah, Craig Cornett, first of all, I want to say a big thank you to the leads on this. And I said to Lydia, I think we all owe them a wine party or something.
Well, we're all having a party, so it's gonna happen.
It's happening.
Exactly. And I really appreciate what is associated with what Catherine said, the problem solving, the consensus, the effort toward consensus here. I think that makes a lot of sense. I got to tell you, the thing I'm struggling with in my head a little bit on the report is the audience here, because I think we're trying to, the audience, I think, was for a broad public, but I also wonder, should it really be geared towards policymakers?
Totally.
Should it really be geared to policymakers, not to the broad public as much?
That's the conflict.
The other thing, too, is having spent over 30 years working in the legislature, I fully appreciate that, and Patty and everybody else, but I really think that the emphasis has got to be, the focus has got to be on the executive, because the executive drives what happens.
I agree.
And I think that it's really got to be towards that. Now, I also think that one of the problems we have here is there's too many other things going on at the same time, and they're a little further down the pike, like Cal-AIM. I'm going to call it Cal-AIM, not Medi-Cal, California, but it's pretty far down the pike already, and it's unfortunate, I think, that we're going to have to figure out how to glom onto. I think, as Maya said, I totally agree that there's a lot happening there, and this could fly in the face of some of that. On the priorities, I also appreciated the way Karen said it. That's the way I was thinking about it in terms of priorities. I don't think we have to reorganize the thing. I would look for tiers of priorities, so especially governors like to have a few easy things to do and quick wins, and then a few things that are going to be longer term. So I think we can do some of that.
It's like the headline, honey, in the paper.
And I think that, a menu of things that gives the governor something like that. And I think the chili pepper idea is a great idea. Something like that. And then on the other thing that worries me, a lot is the funding.
Yes, totally.
Because I think it has been a budget director for a long time. There's a lot of money potentially here. And I do think that to the degree we can, if we can couch the things here that will save money as you go along, I think will make a big difference.
I totally agree with what Randy said. Totally. Thank you, Anna here. I am so impressed with this group. I just have to say, the writing group, like, you guys worked how many weekends in a row? None, right, yeah, no, you guys are working so hard, and I just really appreciate, again, the collaborative nature of this group and how much effort you guys have put into it. We really haven't come to stumbling blocks where we really
have battled it out over disagreements, so maybe that's later, I'm not sure, but,
I'm sure, yeah.
and it was easy to understand language, I really struggle with that too, because we live in this world of acronyms and terms that only we understand, and so even in some of the rewriting I did, I tried to make it easy to understand language, who's the audience, and how do you make that balance? I think it's a really good point.
Hard, yeah.
So I had this, thinking this morning on the drive down here after listening to the governor. I didn't actually listen to the governor's state of the state, but I was listening to the aftermath, right? And I was thinking about, you know, how much of a priority, how much effort is going into the homelessness issues and where the intersection is with our issues. And I know some of it is not LTSS specific. For example, the housing stuff that's happening. That is our issue, right?
Yeah.
And what about universal designed housing and aging in place and all these pieces that I'm hoping the stakeholder group or someone kind of takes up to kind of make those connections with that. And also, let's be real, the next wave of homeless individuals are older adults.
Oh, it's happening now, yeah.
And so, something that's not in here at all is, well, one example is the Mental Health Services Act. And there was a task last year, and they're already happening this year, to eliminate the priority around senior MHSA funding, right? So there is like an actionable recommendation that we could be like, hey, here is a pot of funding, and we need to keep seniors, older adults on the priority for that funding. It's just one example of how we can kind of make maybe some of these intersections with what the governor seems to be interested
I
in.
submitted that recommendation, however, it doesn't part of the, it's not part of the long-term services.
Or is it?
No.
See that?
They're refusing to do behavioral health.
Okay, because I mean, locally, it funds LTSS type of services, at least in my definition of LTSS.
That's the
At
dilemma.
the local level.
We'll talk about that.
Right, so, anyway, so those are kind of some of my initial thoughts, but really appreciate what we have and agree with the, as usual, I'm always over time, okay, prioritizing them, so.
But Anna, I want to say, Anna did a fabulous job with the INA, which was one of the big ideas. And that was masterfully pulled off.
Julia?
So I just wanted to give a couple comments from the perspective, probably the most outsider perspective in the room, right? Because I've been an advocate for a couple of decades, but from the workers' rights perspective. So I wanted to thank everybody in the room because I've learned so much, just sitting here in the room with all of you and, you know, listening to all of your expertise, and to the people on the writing team as well, because I have to say, you know, in reporting back to the Secretary of Labor, I was like, there's no way they're going to make that deadline. Like, that deadline is crazy. Like, I don't know how anybody could ever make it. I don't know what they're thinking. I don't even know why they're trying. Why are they asking for extensions? And did it. So, I mean, I really think, I don't know if that's specific to you all as individuals, or that's sometimes just a higher level of achievement in this particular area of advocacy, but I'm super impressed, like everybody else around the table. So, also from my perspective as somewhat of an outsider, I do think there's room in terms of who the audience is. I think it's easy to, even if it is towards policymakers, I think that the language is actually good. Even if it's addressed to policymakers, if you're in this world, you might understand slightly wonkier language, but if you're not, even as a policymaker, which I have been in a whole other sector, I would not understand. And I did, you know, most of my time in this meeting has been like furiously scribbling down notes and acronyms and looking them up later, right? Because so like, I just want to say that we have to remember that you all have moved in this universe for several decades, right? And most people haven't, even policymakers, even people working for the governor. So I just want to, in terms of figuring out the audience, somewhere in the middle, right? I actually think that the language is good. And I have other comments, I think they're more specific to when we're working out. So thank you.
So, thank you, you all are fabulous. And by the way, if you need me this weekend, I will be around, so if you need me to help out, I can do that. I know this is just broad reflection, so you all did an incredible work doing a lot to sort through. I did see, and as we get to the different sections, the role of the caregiver really needs to be highlighted. You know, the backbone of the system of LTSS.
Totally highlighted.
there's also an equity issue. And most people probably know the data, that some of the African Americans are more likely to be a caregiver. Caregiving, years of caregiving associated with continuing poverty and so forth. So, I think John and I will get a little more specific on where that should show up in here, but, yes. And just, again, we're going to, livable communities, by the way, I'm the writing captain for the Stakeholder Advisory Committee on Livable Communities. Okay. So, because ARP, H-Friendly Network, we're digging in our heels on that one, and between me and Stacy Morris on Research Sub, as well, along with Jenny Hansen, we will be looking at everything, so get your recommendations in, and now's the time. Because there absolutely is intersection. And just a couple of other quick reflections. I just wanted to say this. You all mentioned photos and stories, and I'm wondering if maybe have somebody contribute, but I want to have an infinite right, because it's always a process.
Okay. Just if you have it, send it.
Yeah, I need to go.
Especially as it relates to the different objective
Buckets,
areas, right? Like,
So a lot of times it's going to be around caregiving. And the caregiver as the link to the services and the service coordinator. I also see the whole caregiving issue not really being elevated in California, Healthier for All, anyway, we'll get to that. And, we are willing to help out with, I got the okay for any additional graphics we want for any part of the report, and we will send to our graphic designer.
Thank you.
That's fine.
Yay, thank you.
So, of course, to the writing team, kudos. When I started reading it, I just started using a yellow marker to say how much I liked stuff. Because it's really, I could just tell that suddenly you had really captured what we have been saying about the importance of this issue. So, as Nina has already mentioned, I think that since we know that 90% of the, caregivers are not Medi-Cal, they're adults, they're 48, they're in the workforce, that needs to come through as part of the LTSS system, because they really are the backbone of the system more than any paid caregiver that's out there, in terms of how, not that that's not important, but it's a different way of kind of supporting them with the caregiver. So, I think, and said that. But overall, the other thing is I do agree that we do have to kind of come with our priorities in some easy-to-read fashion. And you're moving the language certainly is pretty easy to read as I was reading through it. I like the fact that you did not use as many acronyms. And, so if I can read it, I think almost anybody can. I just like, my reading level is going down here.
This is Claire. So thank you to you three for being part of this amazing effort. And thank you to everyone for all their work, because it's really, I was really impressed at how much this reflects everybody's work. And so the one thing I want to say is a little bit to Catherine, to your point about boldness. Two things. We are planning an executive summary that we didn't have finished to show. So there is the sense that we want to really highlight the biggest things right up front. If you never get past page 3 or 4, you at least still understand. Two things. One, I would want to make sure that we elevate, so under each objective, we have like a why, and then we call it a vision. And the more I thought about it, the more I want to make sure that, like, the vision to me sounds a little too nebulous, like, it would be nice if we could get there, and like, but I actually think we wrote those to be specifically, hopefully, actually achievable goals. And I know we're worrying about language about goals because those other things are called goals, right. And so, but to me, these, and I was the one who initially tagged everything, sure, at 2030, but my idea being, not that everything should take that long, but the idea is, in 10 years, we should be able to say, did we do these things or not? So I want us to just make sure that that's really clear. And then, in terms of prioritization, I'm really glad this is the conversation we're having, because
I think now what we're really being tasked is to think of ourselves as like the stewards of the state, like for ourselves, our family members, everyone in the state who will ever need LTSS or caregive or provide paid care, to say, how can we get ourselves a little out of our own boxes and really into like what will be best to move forward? And this is, I'm not sure the right objective, but I think one thing we could talk about with priorities is we could say, we want X number of dollars of investment this year, X number of dollars next year, and we want these 5 things to happen this year and these 5 things to happen next year. And we're not going to be overly directive about that dollar amounts next to each of them, but I mean, that's one way to say it's like we want goals or, you know, recommendations to happen, and we want money infused, and those things go hand in hand. So we don't just figure that all the short-term recommendations have to be like the easiest, lowest hanging fruit that maybe people feel like, to Marty's point, how did that make a difference for anyone?
Thank you. I just want to extend my huge thanks to everybody around this table and those who aren't here. I'm thinking also of Ellen. She's not here, and she has been a tremendous help as well. All of you. And I've learned a lot just from this process and from working with everybody, and I just so appreciate the commitment to these issues. I don't think that you see this a lot in different stakeholder groups, so thank you all. I really appreciate this conversation because it seems like the most important part of our work hasn't been done yet, which is the prioritization, but also how you develop a strategy around that and how you message it. So I feel like anybody who wants to lead that effort, I feel like this is probably what we need to do really, really soon within the next week. There's some initial thoughts, and maybe if we if we get through the other items related to the report itself, if we have some time, it would be really good to dedicate a conversation to start fleshing that out now, because we can't wait. It has to happen now. So thank you all.
Yeah, thank you. A couple of just quick things. I think that it's been a challenge to balance all the things you guys have elicited around the room, and that is, are we focused? How broad do we get? Who's our audience? Is it the governor? Is it the administration? We were charged with a report to the governor, but we really want the legislature because that's where the money lives. So I think this conversation, to me personally, has been very, very helpful, and I'm hoping by the end of today we can come to some conclusions on them, the next steps, and how this needs to be shaped so we can meet those objectives. But I think there's probably a way we can both address the charge, which is a report to the SAC/governor, as well as elucidate those things that are going to require legislative action. So I'm still absorbing all of this, but we've been taking notes, and I just thank everyone for their own reflections on it. There were moments we really did have to step away and take a breath, so this is very helpful. So Ms. Susan, you want to say a few things, and then we've got a hand up, it looks like. So we'll go to hands up, yeah.
I'm just very proud of us, thinking back to October, and the executive order was actually pretty thin when it came to LTSS. Our marching orders were, we didn't have a lot of detail, and together we produced 27 pages of content, 130 recommendations, and I think we are modeling a breakdown of silos, the way we've organized this collectively. I can tell you this is how people with Alzheimer's and their families think about LTSS. These are the words that are used: navigation, affordability. So on that mark, I think we've done a very good job. When it gets to prioritizing, when we've got 130, that's something we struggled with, is what do we lift up? And is it fair and equitable among different interest areas? But one thing we talked a lot about is that these 5 areas are interdependent. So I would just challenge us, we don't want to rise up one of these buckets at the peril of another, because it's all interrelated somehow. So as we're starting to prioritize, I would urge us to look in every area. One might have billions, one might be a low-hanging regulatory change, but for the consumer, it all matters. And then I think that concludes reflections.
And we have the phone. We have the phone.
Peter had his reflection already.
And are there
So,
any,
we started with Peter.
stakeholders on the phone who have their 2-minute reflection?
So Brandy Wolf has joined us, and I'm not sure if she wanted to make a comment, but I just figured.
Let's ask her to do her 2-minute reflection.
Brandy, you're.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for a really good discussion. I don't want to duplicate what others have said. I know we were tasked with a tall order to produce a report in a really short period of time, and I am just feeling really grateful for being a part of a group of people that are working really hard through, you know, potential differences or, you know, there are some recommendations that I think we coined them as sticky, but the level of communication and sort of talking through those differences, I think, is doing we are in service to the people that we all represent, and we are doing them a really good service by working together and sort of breaking down those silos. So I'm so happy to be a part of this experience, and I am really proud of the shape that this report is taking.
Should we wrap that up? I think
Now that everyone's,
okay. There's a lot of questions around the table, so do we want to do that, or do we want to go into discussion?
They're more on the phone?
I just have a quick navigation point that I think might help as for the writing as it goes forward. I think there's assuming we keep all the recommendations, 130 recommendations, I do think it would be easier to navigate if each of the recommendations just has a short 2-word or so caption at the beginning of each one. So in other words, you can kind of look through, I mean, like just for example, I'm looking 1A1. To me, that is no wrong door. That's what that recommendation is all about. The second one is sort of web-based portal, something simple like that. Yeah, and I almost think that somebody who is outside of the additional writing should write those after reading it and see what those things are.
It's like a little catchphrase for each one of them.
Yeah, I would kind of refer back to it then easier.
Good point. Okay. Peter?
Just really quick, Peter Mendoza, just for representative. First, I want to just say, I think we've done a lot of great work here, and I think we're putting together, something that will, in time, change people's lives. So I hope we can all stay together. We've already started something right there that I think can really, expand into other issues too. What worries me, both as a person that works professionally and disability rights and independent living, and a person with a disability, and a person who has a family member of one person with a mental health disability, another person with a regional center system, is funding is an issue. Because I don't know if you know, but in the latest federal administration budget, there's large cuts to intellectual developmental disability programs, and there's smaller cuts to independent living. I am concerned that I'm not sure behavioral health fits, because I think it is LTSS. We work professionally, we work with a lot of folks with behavioral health related disabilities. In my home life, my brother was homeless because of mental health disabilities for over 30 years, is now living with me, and I have to teach him ADL all over again. And my older brother, Michael, who's a regional center consumer, we don't talk about success providing. There's more services for him if something happens to me or Jennifer, but there's not services for my brother. So I just need to make an impaction, please. You know, our family is tough, we're strong, we'll get through it, but that really needs to be in there somewhere because it is LTSS. And thanks.
All right, do we want to take more comments, or do we want to move on to the next section? Karen and Christina, and then we will move on to the next section.
Then a break somewhere.
Very quickly, my only comment is it's striking me that we may want to do like a public version of the report, which is basically user-friendly, plain language. You know, this is what it is. These are some of the very broad recommendations that, you know, maybe touch upon the buckets. And then like the policy version of the report, which is for the legislature and the administration. So almost like, you know how when you have the wedding album, there's like the parents of the bride and groom get their little mini version of it, like, you know, with all the best pictures, but it's not too much, like something like that.
Portable one. Yes.
Karen?
I just wanted to bring up that, I have offered to do editing, and so much of the discussion we've had today, I know you guys are also snowblind to this report, because I've written many things myself. So I'm very happy to help integrate some of the comments that we had, today. If I can have through Saturday, because my work week is booked, but if you give me Saturday, that would help.
Yeah, we'll get things by Friday, so.
All right, now it's time for Sarah.
Okay.
We have until about 3:30 when we need to take a break, so let them know. You guys have the clicker for moving this one.
Okay. All right, so we're doing a time check here, hold on, okay. Okay, so I have, okay, 1 second, yeah. All right, so hopefully, what we're trying to do with this next discussion, is we are going to walk through, sorry, my daughter's texting me, I'm just going back there. Okay, now, we'll stop, okay. Don't contact me, okay. Refocus, here we go. Okay, so as we all know, there were those items that have come up, as has been discussed, where there's never going to be a point at which we all agree on everything, and that's okay, nor should we, because they're issues, and if they were easy to solve, they would have been solved. So it's okay that people come from different positions. The goal of this report is to not drown out all the voices. So the goal was, as these were written, was to reflect the recommendation, but to also show that there's not complete consensus on it, so that it was clear to the reader that this is an issue that is more contentious, but significant for the system. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to walk through these items. Our goal is not to engage in a policy debate, because I don't think we'll change everybody's opinion. It is to determine whether you all feel okay with it as written in the report, whether you feel like there needs to be minor tweaks, and if you do want minor tweaks that won't change the content, that's probably not a problem, but we won't start editing right now. You can just email it out to the team. And then if there is a big issue and a big problem, then we will ask that people figure out how to address that in the next day or two with the respective writing team. So for example, if it's a leadership issue, we would want the leadership team to resolve that, get everybody together and figure out how to come to consensus in the next few days. Does that make sense to everybody for this content discussion right now? Okay. Okay, so if we can pull up the slide, yes, there we go. So what I did is I listed all the issues. If there's anything missing, please let me know. What I'm going to do is, assuming not everybody's had the chance to read everything, I'm going to do the quick read-through of the item and of the recommendation, and then we'll pause and we'll see what people's comments are. We have 45 minutes slated for this, so hopefully we could do each in less than 10 minutes. I do want to tag on one thing to this, which is Catherine mentioned the new recommendation at the end. We discussed this briefly in our phone call last Friday, which I know folks, not everybody could be on, but essentially there is a new recommendation under the funding one that we want to talk about, which is the HCBS entitlement. So that's not a consensus, you know, a sticky issue right now, but we do want to leave some time for that too. So that's a sixth item.
What about the going from deputy cabinet secretary to what he's done in terms of health and human services? That was new to me.
Okay, so that's under the state level, so we'll talk about that as well. Okay, thank you, Patty. We'll talk about the new unit of the HHS agency. Okay, Claire, did you want to clarify something?
I just want to say that also, obviously, if people have things they want to discuss, they should, but if this is, remember sort of, I think Brandy brought this up, like, if you can live with it, just to say that I think we're all agreeing that while the report is important, the report isn't the thing. We want the things to actually happen. So, if we want to have time to talk about prioritization, also, we want to keep moving through these things so that we can get to that discussion too.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, so we're going to start then with, the first issue is the standardized screening and assessment. The question and the issue that has been addressed or raised is, are we talking about developing another universal assessment tool, which I think everybody in this room who is attached to the CCI process can agree was painful, difficult, and didn't result in anything, and it's not a ideal tool to be striving for. So I didn't hear anybody say that we want to recreate that, and we tried to adjust the language so it reflected the fact that the problem that we're trying to address is the fact that people have to go to multiple places. They get asked the same questions everywhere they go. It's not an efficient process. It doesn't track data well across the system. So here is how the recommendation has been. Sure.
None of us can see that.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's 1B.
Terrible.
Okay, it's 1B and it's on page 8. So 1B, which is page 8. I'm not going to read through the issue statement because I think everybody knows the issue.
Page 9.
The recommendation, page 8 or 9?
Page 8.
Recommendation, work with stakeholders in the short term to identify the common standard eligibility questions and a set of evidence-based public domain screening tools to identify functional, health, cognitive, and social support needs and risk factors while documenting the individual's goals and preferences. So again, these are screening tools that would identify those. So that's the short-term goal. And then it's the second 1B2 to adopt a common baseline of eligibility information across all LTSS programs that can be shared confidentially and quickly among LTSS partners. And then the third component is over the longer term, pursue development of a comprehensive assessment question to be utilized across health and LTSS settings with the necessary data, funding, and infrastructure to support its system-wide implementation. So again, we don't want to change the existing assessment, but what are the common questions that can be asked across the different assessments and programs? And then 4, ensure Californians with cognitive impairment are identified through the intake process and assessed for risk. Currently, 1 in 5 persons with Alzheimer's disease lives alone and is at risk. So oftentimes these screening tools don't assess for cognitive impairment. So I'm going to pause. I want to hear what people have to say. Is this something you can live with? I'll start, Karen. Yes, I'll just walk around the room. I don't mind if you do, because then I can talk in between walking. Okay, Jen.
She can't sit still.
I've been concerned about the use of the word eligibility, and that is something that has come up in previous discussions through many years about a uniform way of doing some kind of an intake tool or an assessment tool. When you cross that line into using the word eligibility here, you're talking about privatization of something that is a county-based eligibility system to determine Medi-Cal eligibility, IHSS eligibility, and so forth. So this is a real hot-button issue to counties, I believe, and to the workers in the counties, and we would like to see the word eligibility out.
Okay. Is there anybody that wants to comment on that word eligibility? I don't have a problem with that. That makes sense to me. So, Catherine, and then I'll move down to you.
So this is on number 2, and right now it says can be shared confidentially and quickly. Before, in other sections, we use the word securely to deal with kind of those problems. I would add that.
Okay. So eliminate eligibility and add securely. Anna, did you have a?
Yeah. Securely. I'd just like to comment that this really resonates, I think, at the local level, to have this screening for at-risk and different social determinants of health. So I just want to put in, and the fact that we're talking about goals and preferences, we're getting to that person-centered, and the infrastructure needed to be able to share that data I think this is doable, and it's what's needed towards a no wrong door system. The one thing I might add is putting a no wrong door in there. This helps get us to more of a no wrong door system for the individuals.
Okay, thank you. Anybody here, okay, yeah.
Okay, so walk me through this just really quick. So it looks like this is kind of a step process where we're starting with common standard eligibility questions. And Screening questions, sorry. And I guess, Donna can probably answer this, I want to make sure that the needs of the caregiver are looked at as well.
So, yeah.
So where would that fall?
Can I say that? So we had, that was in there, and then it was suggested that that get eliminated because they didn't want to get, Donna, you had said that that would get confused with it, so we absolutely have that in there. So we're fine, great with having it in there.
I think what has happened is that if we put in family caregiver on an individual system level, I don't know, sometimes when the caregiver's calling, they're calling on behalf of someone else. And that doesn't mean that we're going to actually screen the caregiver for what their needs are.
At that moment.
At that moment. And so that's why I have said that if we're really just focusing on the older adults or somebody with a cognitive impairment, then you're not going to do the caregiver screen because that's a really different level of screening because then you're asking the caregiver for their needs. And so they usually aren't calling initially on their own behalf. But it is important to identify that who called is probably the person, if they're calling about somebody, that they're the caregiver because they're not going to self-identify. The other one on 1B4, and this is a question, is that how, being a psychologist, I'm like, how are we going to identify somebody who is Alzheimer's when they're calling? Because the person with Alzheimer's may or may not be calling. We're not doing MMSEs on everybody who makes a phone call. This one kind of hits me the wrong way because I don't see how we can do that on a call when people are calling about memory. Sorry.
That's great, and if you have suggestions for the caregiver side of it, if there's a tweak to the words that we can supplement, please, will you or Nina send it to us? That would be great.
So I can add, if we're talking about screening tools on the cognitive impairment side, historically, there are not questions that ask about decision-making, judgment, memory, and that is overlooked entirely. Or many screening tools use mental health questions around depression, and they don't get at the issue. So if it were it would be probably one question that would capture it, and there are things that are used in the CCI about judgment and decision-making. And to Nina's point, in a stepped process, probably the first screen would be a handful of questions that wouldn't include that. To the equity work group, this definitely came up because we don't collect a lot of the data on race and ethnicity and language, and so we can't measure if people are being served or not because it's not part of the screening. So at some stage, probably the first screen where there's 5 questions, there wouldn't be something about cognitive impairment. But the next level, where there might be 10 questions, absolutely.
Say something real quick.
And
traumatic brain injury. Part of, we were talking about this over the weekend. This might be something we also want to flag for research subcommittee because, as Susan just said, even in the Department of Aging, I was trying to do an infographic and I was looking for certain data, and we have a paucity of data about things that are important to us in analyzing progress toward equity. So we have a long ways to go. So if we can just start to have some common data points, that would be a big step forward. So I think we should flag this one also for research stuff.
Yeah, okay. Any other comments related to that? I think with those edits. Maya, sorry, and Marty, hold on.
No, it's fine. I just want to echo Anna's comment. This is hugely important. One of the most things that we hear the most at the local level is people really frustrated really important. We have trouble, Carrie knows, with evaluation, there are a lot of complaints from consumers about those.
Yep.
So how to make those useful.
Yep.
And how to limit them to the most important, it's a huge question and, a very important one, so, I really support this recommendation.
Good.
Thank you so much.
Marty Moto, City Can. First, if we can just add in, it's just, I didn't mention this when this first passed through because I didn't want to stop anything, but, just mention, when we're mentioning other systems or other networks, mention regional center systems, because when I look at this, my sister crossed different system lines, mental health, Medi-Cal, regional center, county stuff through IHSS. So my father didn't know the difference. He just was desperate to get something for her. I had to figure out the difference. But if you don't see yourself in here and you're missing like the wedding picture, you're looking for that picture where you're in it and Uncle Larry is not there in the book that you gave him and it's not making you happy. And, yeah, right? And, but we just need to mention it because when I'm reading this, I don't see, my sister was in the regional center, she was Medi-Cal, she was all these other places. I see that sort of in here. I don't see regional centers at all, even though it's mentioned. So when I see cognitive, as we all know, people who have Down syndrome, if they live long enough, they will get full Alzheimer's. And the thing is that they could have a developmental intellectual disability and even some cognitive disabilities early on, but get that because of the onset of Alzheimer's. And we need to know that they're included in here too. So intellectual disabilities, developmental, it's just nice to mention. And also one other little thing is when we mention workforce, occasionally let's just mention the word people in the workforce because I was a direct care worker and I was a person and I just want to make sure that we don't just think it's a block of individuals that we're talking about or an entity. It's people. There are people and their family, a lot of them are family members or caregivers who are not part of the workforce or unpaid. Lastly, going to the point that you made actually on the equity of work group, is I don't know if we have room for this, but each of these recommendations should have an outcome. Like, if we're doing this, we expect that it will help reduce disparities, and I think you mentioned that, Maya, to one of the recommendations, there was a hope that it would reduce disparities. But we should mention what each of these recommendations will do, because we got to hold ourselves accountable too. And so I just think but that will make the report longer. So I don't know how we do that.
It's a good idea, though.
But each one should have some kind of outcome.
Subcommittee on March 10th.
Yeah. And then, going to Christina's point, we can work on tools that will measure that, and then maybe ways to achieve it in terms of the strategy.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so mindful of time, is there any other burning things? I think we got a good sense of what to do with this. If those changes are made, I'm gonna assume just that everybody's okay with that.
With all those edits? Are we good with all those edits? Yes.
Do we want any formal process on this? Is everybody okay? Like, yay? Okay. All right. Okay, good. I'm adding in CD, okay, great. Great. Okay, so the next item that we will walk through, is page 23, and it's 4D. Okay. So everybody go to page 23, 4D. This is staffing issues in residential settings. We weren't 100%, we know that this was not a full consensus item, but the goal here is to make sure the way as written that people can live with it. So, Clay and Catherine, this is yours. So the recommendation reads, the state should convene stakeholders, including the Department of Health Care Services and Department of Social Service, in a time-limited work group to address these challenges and respond to proposals calling for increased staffing ratios, elimination of current staffing ratio waivers, and linking Medi-Cal reimbursement directly to staffing. Basically, this issue and recommendation were summarized into a very, very concise paragraph that we probably could have written 20 pages on alone. So I want to turn to Catherine and to Craig to see, thank you first for your work on this. This is a tremendous amount of work. And
What was the objection, Dave?
I don't know, we wanted to make sure, Lydia had said she wanted to make sure that everybody was okay with this one.
There wasn't so much objection, but this goes to your point about, do we want to have this group work on some of these issues?
Oh, that point.
Yes.
You did it.
Okay, well,
So it isn't a,
Really well on something else, and I'm like,
the statement was consensus, but it was to answer your
Oh, I see,
question
okay.
about, you know, is this something that this group wants to tackle going forward?
Sorry, Sarah, did Catherine and Craig have a point about that? I just didn't hear what you asked them, but then I didn't hear their answer.
We were just confused.
we worked on a different issue together, like separate, I think that's in here, but then I think it's because we said, should you be punting everything? I'm not even sure, I'm just the one that said like punting everything to a future stakeholder group, so I think that's how we got it.
For the record, I'm okay with this, the way it is. I mean, for the record, I am, and at least, and that's, but I don't think I'd want to see a lot. I don't think I'd want us to do this, frankly. I think that's beyond where we are.
Okay, so this is off the list.
We're good,
We're good with this one,
Okay,
okay.
but Karen has
See how well we work together?
Wait, I'm confused.
I'm confused.
I was confused too, that's why I went. So my confusion is just reading this is on the 4C versus 4D. Because they both have, the 4C is, first sentence in the issue, workforce concerns are a challenging issue, and then 4D is addressing staffing issues in 24/7 residential settings. So should those be one? And it's just a question.
I think they're different things.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I was confused about.
Okay, so basically summarizing too much into one issue statement and one.
Hi, Christina, are you guys in the queue?
Okay.
No, I would just like to reiterate what just happened.
Okay, what just happened was, so there were certain things we wanted to make sure everybody was okay with, because not everybody's been involved in every work group. So we just wanted to make sure that we're all good on that as that's written right now with 4D. It sounds like we are, so.
But not that.
What are you pointing out? What?
We're not on 4I yet.
No, I'm sorry, I'm talking about the document that says refer to another MTA goal.
We're not there.
We're not on that
There
yet.
are some pieces of staffing issues in here,
Correct.
and
Okay,
we're not
so
talking about that.
Claire's gonna lead the discussion on the referred items to other stuff, so yes, you are correct, okay? Everybody get that, clear as mud? Okay. Anybody else? Anyone else, going like,
Oh, yes, right in front of you, Sarah, right there.
Julia, then.
I don't need to ask this question, I want to clarify, I may have missed it in the instructions. We have like very specific questions that don't need overall discussion, we can just give us a preview, and we don't have to take the time right now.
Absolutely. Okay. And if you find things that really need editing, like words here and there, not content heavy, but any edits like that, please send them in track changes.
Yeah, maybe more.
Thank you.
I don't know if this is more substantive, I'm sorry.
Okay.
So just to clarify, can we address substantive questions about, or should we wait that now?
I think so.
Substantive now.
It's sort of a takeoff on Karen's question. And it's not specific to, I guess it has to do with residential care, the direct care workforce. I'm not clear on why 4C is pulled out from 4A. Why we couldn't collapse those two, and just clarify that the direct care workforce includes the home care and residential care.
Yeah.
And then therefore have one last recommendation.
Okay, 4C and 4A?
Yeah, and Ron,
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so you mark that?
Yeah.
Okay, good, thank you, very good idea. Okay, it was Susan.
That took care of it.
Okay.
So what was that last one, the 4C and the 4A?
4C and 4A should be combined.
All right,
That's great, I'm so glad that people are taking notes. Yes, Nina?
So I think this data came from someone else, so 4.7 million, I'm thinking, caregivers.
We had that same question. So we need that number clarified,
Where are you?
Where are you?
Okay.
It's an edit, we'll.
4A, it's an edit, okay, just follow up with us, okay. Great, okay, so perfect, so we're moving on from 4D to a really, really easy issue, it's called nurse delegation. 4I, And I'm gonna read both the issue statement and the recommendations. 4I is page 25. The issue is as follows. Unpaid family or friend caregivers often have no choice but to provide challenging care to loved ones, including tube feeding, ventilator care, intramuscular injections, and ostomy care. These unpaid caregivers who are either unwilling or unable to perform these tasks must hire a registered nurse to administer these tasks to their loved ones. This is because California law prohibits privately paid home health aides from performing certain health maintenance tasks. However, with proper training, home health aides could perform these tasks at a fraction of the cost of the RN, benefiting families needing help and reducing taxpayer expenditures. The recommendation is, at a minimum, the state should maintain the ability of IHSS direct care workers to perform the above specified tasks. Second part is revise regulations to permit nurse delegation for certain health maintenance tasks for trained direct care professionals. So, I know we tried clarifying the issue so that it wasn't so bureaucratic sounding, but what we've tried to do is there was a lot of concern because this is not an issue for IHSS workers right now. They are able to, they have been delegated the authority to do these tasks, which is great, and nobody has, fought that. But the issue is that for family caregivers, they're allowed to do these tasks, but they don't want to sometimes, and they would rather, or they can't, or they would like to pay a home health aide to do it. They're not allowed to pay a home health aide to do it. They have to hire a nurse to do it. Well, you're not going to hire a nurse to come into your house 4 times a day at $50 an hour to do some of these things. Most people couldn't. So Claire has a question. We want to know, again, the question being asked right now is, are you okay with the language as it is? It's not to all agree on what should happen here. So.
My only question, and it really is a question, is I think 4I1, the whole thing about retaining the ability within IHSS, I don't even know if we need it, because nobody in my understanding has put it on the table as a possible ability to get rid of it, and I just worry that, like, calling it out, it might put it in somebody's mind. And so my recommendation would be to strike it unless there was a reason it was added that I don't know about.
Yeah. Christina, this is what we talked about, so I want your feedback on that. Hold on.
There were some, yeah.
I agree.
Can you give that, like,
Yeah, the first bullet under 4I, so you're on, this is 4I, page.
The first bullet, eliminating the first bullet.
Yeah. Oh, got it. I hear what you're saying, Claire. It was, the idea to add it in there was in order to be clear that we all agree that that should remain, because we didn't, just the subject in general has the possibility of drawing attention to it.
Exactly.
So meaning that if we're talking about nurse delegation in general, does it not inevitably lead people to look at the IHSS exclusion or whatever the heck it is, and then say, well, why does that exist? That's a problem. It kind of just preempts that by stating, no, we like that, we want to keep it. But I think it could go either way.
Okay, so I see Julia, Catherine, Julia does not, so I'll start with Catherine just since I'm over here, and then I'll go to, Nina and Donna.
So I guess I'm a little confused, because when I read this, so it seems like there's consensus in the room about nurse delegation.
Right.
I guess I don't view the fact that there was a comment that we considered gets to veto a recommendation and say you shouldn't do it. So I'm really just a little process confused, like if we all agree, then we should just say this is what we want to have happen. I assure you, the CNA is going to, they are very good at doing whatever they're going to do, but a clear statement from a thoughtful group of stakeholders about how to address the shortages and the problems and the inequities in the system, I think is really important.
Yes, and to clarify, the lack of consensus came from the fact that of this sensitive issue for IHSS. That was the internal lack of consensus. But then, yes, recognizing that there's a significant other.
And I think think the way it's properly couched, people are trained, and, you know, and I think trained and supervised, I think it's very properly couched, and I think.
Yeah, I do too.
I completely agree.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, okay, Nina.
Are we saying to remove it, or?
No,
we're keeping
So I appreciate the support in the room. So ARP did write this recommendation with,
Yeah,
Heather,
keep it.
UT Davis, who's a national expert on the benefits of this delegation. We definitely we listened to Christina's concerns. We definitely, I mean, I would like that to stay in here. California only allows delegation of 2 tasks, which is ridiculous, but it is, compared to other states that we would like to emulate. And understanding there would be a political, fight on this, that's fine, but this is just a recommendation coming from this group that, of course, we want to keep included. Thank you.
This is also a recommendation that was supported by the California Task Force on Family Caregiving, because of the reasons. I mean, like right now, no one cares the caregivers have to do all of this. Yeah. And that if they can't do it, that they have to get somebody else, an RN, to pay for it. So what this does is it helps with the equity for the 80 to 90% of the population that are informal, that may, I'm not saying 80, 90% are doing these tests, but complicated care is becoming far more frequent. And I think the last number was that 40% of caregivers or higher are actually doing this kind of complicated care. And this is delegated, and it's just going to keep going up. So this is an equity issue in terms of income even, because people with IHSS, they can have this, but everyone else can't. So that's us.
I have a good example of that, yeah.
So it sounds like, we're gonna hear from Karen and from Patty and Marty. I think my question is right now whether we want that first recommendation about IHSS or not. So here, Karen.
Well, I do agree the language on IHSS should come out. But I also think that there may be a misunderstanding about what is allowed in the statute. And this is something that we actually went through when Senator Liu and the others, but Patty, were working on this exact same issue. Business and Professions Code Section 2727 and 2727.5.
Oh.
Okay, they authorize very broadly outside of, it's within the Nursing Practices Act, and it allows family members and other untrained, unlicensed individuals to do an awful lot of things.
Right.
It's called gratuitous use of care, and I worry that having something in here creates the path for CNA to say that is, that we're trying to broaden something that has been broad now for almost 100 years.
So just to
what's
the
your...
issue is not that family caregivers are allowed to do it. It's the issue is they're not allowed to hire a home health aide to do it.
There is not an exception for IHSS workers in the Nurse Practices Act. That's never been the case.
Right.
The exception within the Nurse Practices Act applies broadly across a lot of different people. And so I just think that it would be helpful to have some people look at the current code. I've gone through this, so there's a lot of different papers that have been done. CNA has definitely suggested that the regulations and the current statute be narrowed, and there have been papers on this. So I think it's potentially a mistake to have this out there when in fact current law has been proven again and again and again to be very broad.
Wait a minute, so are you saying that they already can do this?
Oh, well.
Not CNA, because they're licensed.
They're like,
What if you hire an unlicensed, hire a
Okay.
regular home care worker?
So I think what we're talking about is redrafting to be clearer about maybe what's allowed or maybe not. That's kind of the question. But it's really a more simple recommendation that says the Nurse Practice Act exception should allow CNAs to provide the service if they are trained and appropriately supervised, maybe without having to get into all the other stuff. It's just a very clear, short recommendation, right? It's increasing the workforce to achieve this purpose, I will write it while we're sitting here.
Thank you. So, because it's about home health aides now, because when you're, so home, I guess,
Well, it has to be just.
I thought that was the way it was written now.
HHA's and the
But,
Okay, now do it. They do it.
they do it under the table, so they don't,
They do
they're
it
not,
under the table. It's being done.
yeah, but
Home
that's
health
the problem,
aides.
because
Yeah.
if we don't want to, family caregivers are in a bind when they can't do this, you know.
They have to like take off.
I mean, why the hell is it under the table? I mean,
So that's fine, we can make it broader, maybe what we should do on this, is, so there's just differing opinions on what the problem is, even on the LTSS scorecard that, where this has been studied, Heather Young has studied it, that there's disagreement on what the problem is?
No,
Okay.
no, we don't want to say it, sorry.
I really, can I just try and write something that's really clear?
Please.
And then we can like move back to it in a minute, right? And not get in, I think getting into a lot of minutia about what might be allowed now, what people do under the table, all seems like a really bad idea to me. And I think it's broader than what might happen in somebody's home, actually. I don't think it's a problem in school, but we're not gonna go to school.
Okay, so to be continued, Catherine's gonna try and rewrite it now, while we're talking on another issue, but I wanna get the rest of the comments. I know Margie was first and then,
I just wanted, no, I'll skip it.
so this is Marty. I appreciate, Catherine, you're gonna try to redraft, working with the other parents at Eastler, but I just wanna challenge the group is, that, yeah, it might raise some issues, but if it's gonna clarify a need for the families, whether they think they're working under the table or not, and we don't wanna upset the CNA, or we don't wanna touch an issue that is kind of
It's not about that.
very sensitive. But the whole point of what we're doing here is to clarify long-term services and support. I don't wanna, no, just hear me out. I didn't push back on you. If families need this clarification, we gotta figure a way in how we draft language that clarifies it, that is not afraid to touch a sensitive issue. And I think, I've seen the way you can redraft things, so I think I'm pretty confident you can do that. But I really want to push back on the fear that, oh, well, it works now, let's not touch it. That's frankly not the way we should be approaching it. I mean, how is it that we talk about bold ideas and moving boldly, but we're afraid to clarify something that is allowed, but we don't want to touch it because we're afraid someone's going to try to change it? Well, guess what? We're advocates. If someone tries to change it, we're going to push back. There's a lot of things in this master plan, a lot of things that are being pushed forward in policy that are going to harm older Californians. And so are we going to be afraid that we raise an issue that this is a need to not reduce IHSS 7%? But if we raise that, they might think about more cuts or something. No, it's wrong. And we got to clarify this issue that allows families to access the help they need. This is something my family could have used. And the fact that you have to do it, if you think you have to do it under the table, that is wrong. And I think sometimes the easiest thing to do is to clarify something, and if the risk is that someone else is going to try to come at you, there's a lot more risks in here than that, okay? If we can't face that, then this report is meaningless. I go back to the point, we got to make this meaningful to the people that need the help, to the worker, to the person who provides the work, but also to the family member. And my family has gone through this, and it wasn't just accessing eligibility for services, it was getting those services. And yeah, sometimes we had to lie, we had to make up stuff, because Medi-Cal, all these different services had different requirements to get help for my sister or even for my father. And so I think, let's just, but I'll wait for Catherine, because Catherine, I've seen your work, and, you know.
I'm confused.
okay, well, Susan, did you wanna add something
I
in?
just wanted to hear from, it wasn't clear if we wanted to leave IHSS.
I didn't hear the final word from Christina, if we want that first bullet in or out.
I can live with what the group
Whatever,
wants.
Catherine.
Whatever.
Part of what Catherine's doing here.
Put it out.
Okay, well, we're looking forward to Catherine working her magic on this. Because this would be a big, this would, be a big landmark, for us. So, okay. Thank thank you all. This is an important issue, clearly, and I understand it's complicated.
I know.
Okay, so now we're moving on to, recommendation. We're now into the leadership section. We're gonna talk about 5B, NC, and 5A, because there was a couple of different, this is on page 26, so it's on page 26. So I just want to give a little context for what happened here. So initially, the recommendations in this section were at the front, and it was first focused on creating a governor's cabinet level secretary position, recognizing that the leadership has to start at the top. That recommendation was put in the front section of the whole report because everybody believes that leadership is needed to bring this forward and it's in the governor's office to make these a priority. This section is dealing more with state and local administrative structure. So recommendation 5A, this was a recommendation that I think Claire thought of, which is the fact that starting at the agency level, you have assistant secretaries and the folks at the Health and Human Services agencies working on these issues by department. And long-term care, as we all know, long-term LTSS crosses departments, crosses many issues. So the concept was, in addition to the other recommendations that have been brought forth, actually have some authority within the HHS agency to have some focused policy development and prioritization of LTSS issues at the agency level. And that agency unit would be focused on examining options to align services or align policies and administration of LTSS, coordinating efforts to support seamless access to LTSS, improve how to better integrate LTSS for the Medicare, Medi-Cal enrollees, and promoting innovation in LTSS service delivery, including technology. The reason that that's there is, again, it kind of culminates some of what's happening at the Department of Healthcare Services, some of what's happening at Department of Aging, potentially, and Department of Rehab, Social Services, as a way to bring, to better coordinate and streamline policy development. Then, after that, you go to the concept of, which is 5B on page 27, which is looking at state department reorganization. This is an item that has not gotten consensus. I'm just going to read through these because I think we can talk about them all together. At the state department level, there's varying viewpoints on how to best organize the state government, but there is agreement that any state reorg effort should only proceed if it is grounded in system changes that will improve how state government meets the needs of the people, okay, at the local level. So this recommendation currently reads that by 2021, the Health and Human Services Agency should evaluate the current state administrative structure in consultation with stakeholders to explore establishment of a new department within the agency, providing state-level leadership in home and community-based service delivery for older adults and people with disabilities. It would incorporate the current Department of Aging, among others, with the goal of enabling all Californians, regardless of their income and needs, to age with dignity and independence, in the setting of their choice. So again, this is trying to recognize the fact that we have a state administrative structure right now that's somewhat fragmented. So starting at the agency level and then having a specific examination of what needs to happen at the department level to better align services, because I don't think any of us have that answer right away. We might have specific proposals, but they need to figure out with stakeholders the best way to do this. So this was what we're hoping is that people are okay with these recommendations in the way that they have kind of emerged in this report. So I see Patty. I'm not surprised.
Patty has passion.
So here you go, Patty.
I don't have a problem with the second recommendation. I don't know that I have a problem with the first recommendation. But I do have a problem that the Deputy Cabinet Secretary in the Governor's office is out of the report. Because that will show that the Governor is going to walk the talk. No, I don't see it.
So that was in the front, under gubernatorial leadership, at the front of the report, as a way to frame it.
Right here.
That's the three-page,
It's on page
it's
three.
on,
Oh,
right,
if
right
there's
here.
a recommendation,
Right,
as a recommendation?
Well, it talks about, it's not an
We urge the
LTSS,
governor.
it's bigger than LTSS, so, Patty, the thinking was that recommendation in the governor's office, it's not just about our LTSS issue, this again gets to scope. So we wanted to pull it out of the LTSS focus recommendations and put it at the very front under the context of leadership.
Okay. And I am, I don't know how this is gonna turn out, and this is the one, both of these recommendations, I am so glad we have a timeline, it's called next year. Because to me, aside from rural, this is the most important thing to me, is the restructuring, that has never happened. And that has to happen first, and I like the one that you wrote in. I didn't have, we had, you did that, Claire? I really like that, I mean, I do, no, that's good.
All right, good, yay. All right, so Anna and then Marty, okay. And Anna, I do recall your feedback about if this is done, it has to make a difference at the local level. We can't just have some bureaucratic exercise.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much summed it up, this is Anna. So, we advocated on the federal level for the Administration on Community Living and to move the independent living centers there with Older Americans Act and DD funding. And,
What does it mean, Anna?
the Administration on Community Living.
What in the hell does that mean?
Well, that's exactly my point.
Community living, what does that mean?
Well, we were supposed to kind of, be able to have this coordinated entity on the federal level with multiple funding streams for disability and aging. But I mean, maybe I'm missing something, but I have yet to see any example of how that has helped improve the lives of the people we serve.
Totally not.
So that was now, just to be, transparent, the California Foundation for Independent Living Centers, we supported those last year to do the restructuring on the state level, right? So there is support to do this. In concept, it's a beautiful idea, right? And I think that's where, just how do we make sure that the people that we're actually doing this all for on the local level see a difference?
Right.
Like, what does that look like? And so I think the way it's written, it is fine. I really don't object to this. I would not want to prioritize this without also prioritizing no wrong door, navigation on the local level, on those pieces that will actually make a difference for the people in our communities.
And I think,
It has to be a
very
structure
good
to pass
point.
it
I would say also, Anna, none of this will be meaningful without the leadership. Because
Absolutely.
even if you reorganize and do it well, if you don't have good leadership.
No, if you don't have leadership, it's not gonna
Okay,
happen.
Marty.
Thank you. I agree with what you said, Anna, but I also underscore the point, Patty, you've been making, that there needs to be the leadership, well, actually, what you just made, Sarah, as well, is the leadership has to be there, or else the other things don't happen. But it has to be accountable, right, like everything.
Yes, of course.
And there is some precedent, I mean, the governor in his budget proposal is going to form is proposing, well, not proposing, but was proposing until the legislature adopts it, the Department of Early Childhood Development. And the issues of early childhood crosses all kinds of different departments.
Yep.
Crosses all kinds of different funding streams, and yet they're pulling that together, not without controversy. There's going to be some controversy of what that department's going to do, but I think that might be an example that we may want to examine, because that was meant to focus attention on early childhood issues, and there's a question about what will it do on early intervention, but, we'll have to see, and education's not totally there's all kinds of fights. One thing I was wondering, though, the issue of the legislative leadership, and you mentioned this, Patty, about a recommendation of recommending the legislature.
Yeah, we talked.
Right, we talked about that, and Griff, I'm sure you have
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. Patty can talk about, it got pulled from the report because of concern that it's not accepted, it's making it a recommendation to the legislature on how they structure their committees in this sort of a report didn't seem to be potentially as effective. because it's not, we can't really make, well, we could, but Patty also has some other strategies about it, so here.
Well, we're telling the governor what to do, so.
Yeah, that's right, but the
I know.
reason is that nobody has control over committees except the pro tem and the speaker of the assembly. They decide if and what a committee is going to be, who's going to be on it, and what that committee's jurisdiction is. So, you know, aging and long-term care does nothing but look at bills that, from the Department of Aging. So it's very small potatoes, very small potatoes. But we can't have that within this report, because it's like saying to the pro tem, well, we want a standing committee on aging and long-term care, but we want expanded jurisdiction, because all of a sudden, there's gonna be much more for this committee to look at. I do have another strategy, because we have public people in the audience and on the phone. I can't share it right now, but it will be shared, and, it will be shared. Anyway, I do have a strategy, and I'm moving forward on it.
And I wasn't saying that we're pushing forward a standing committee recommendation, just what should the legislative.
Right, no, thank you, Marty, for raising that, and it certainly is an important consideration. I think it was one we were trying to figure out how to respond, so that's.
Yeah.
So,
Well, it looks like we're okay.
looks like, is everybody okay? Everybody's good.
Right.
Doing it there.
All right, okay, so we got through the
Knocking
mission.
these
Now,
off.
I have a few minutes left to talk about this new recommendation. If everybody could, go to page 27.
Oh, I didn't know that we were talking about county. This one, 5C.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Did you combine everything on state and county in that discussion?
Oh, my God, I was
I know, I was waiting for it to get to that point.
I guess I forgot it, because I just.
Ready?
I know.
You're so excited, yes.
5C,
I'll just put that.
so, a proposal came forward from the County Welfare Directors Association to explore,
I know, it's like, where's
how
the
we
county?
could better align programs and services at the local level, Patty. I know. And so again, this one was not one that we had the opportunity to talk about in our committee structure, so we wanted to think about how to thoughtfully present it to make sure that the issue got discussion, because I do think when you're talking about state reorg, you need to also think about local level reorganization. Again, this is page 27, and this is recommendation 5C. So this is how the issue and the recommendation reads. At the local level, LTSS programs are fragmented and administered across multiple county-based and community-based agencies, as we all know what that includes. The recommendation is that the state should examine options to better integrate and coordinate service delivery across county health and human service programs at the local level. To this end, the Departments of Aging and Social Services should partner with counties and other entities, including AAAs, as well as IHSS, APS, and public guardian and servitors, to review options for consolidating administration of services in order to provide older adults and people with disabilities with streamlined access to a fuller array of services at the county level. Again, this is not recommending that this happen right away. It's recommending that these discussions happen and that they explore this concept further for the goals stated. Anna and Donna. Here. So Donna.
Right. Yeah.
Anytime we get to the county level, I always worry that when they get merged like this, and we've seen aging disappear. When it gets merged with children and adults, and that's why DMH, and suddenly all the aging focus is gone. So that's my concern with the recommendation, is that we are not at a strength-based level to when we get down to the county level, but that's.
So then my question would be, which I understand, we're going to hear some of the concerns. So then the question is, are you okay with the language as it is now? Like, is this something that you could live with as is written in the report as a way to continuing a discussion but not adopting a program or policy? Continuing discussion. So the way it's written is okay. Anna?
Karen and Marty.
What do I say? So this recommendation, there's a few so part of the recommendation specifically was that AAA should be put in-house in the county level,
right,
which I think majority are, but there's quite a few that are not, in the county structure. one, our AAA is not, that I work with, it's a nonprofit joint powers authority. And so, you know, the way this plays out on the community level is in some counties it might make a lot of sense, and in other counties it wouldn't. For example, right now, one of our very rural counties would get no allocation of older American tax funding without the current joint powers structure that they have, where each of the counties and the 7-county joint powers authority gives up some of their funding of older American tax funding to give to that very rural community. Right, so that's one of the concerns that has come up, is how we ensure statewide older American tax funding for some of the most rural, least populated counties. So that's one example. The other is just the leadership, the same kind of piece that goes into the leadership discussion on the state level, right? So some of the counties that I work with are amazing. They would partner really well, it would be a great, you know, it could really work, and in others, there's some real concerns, I think, because of the leadership, and it's just getting absorbed in the county, they use up all the administrative dollars, and then with our current structure, you know, there's more money to give out to community-based organizations, right, because it's this joint powers, nonprofit, and they have less administrative overhead. So those are the kind of concerns that I hear. Also, it's going to take some, like right now, the ADRCs and state statute are, you know, a relationship between a AAA and an independent living center. And the org chart that CDWA submitted was super confusing, and it put independent living centers off to the side, and it was just like, how is this really going to work? So a lot of questions. So, but I just want to say that the way this is structured, I'm not opposed to this. This is what has to happen on the local level for no wrong door and better access.
Yeah, so it's a way of saying these are all good, important considerations, and that we think it's worthy of discussion, so let's have that discussion with the state partners and county governments.
So Karen P., Sonoma County, in Sonoma County, all these services are already merged into my department. And almost all of our older Americans actually does go out to nonprofits, et cetera. I think that the language I'm fine with, even though I think I would like it to be even older, because I think it works really well, but should examine options, to me, is a really good way to word it, and I'm fine with that language. I think it just means that they should explore options. And that means, you know, we can look at things as it comes up, as it progresses along. Can AAAs be phased in, for example? Are there exceptions that we should look at? What are some pros and cons of integrating and coordinating services? Because unless we want to acknowledge that things are not fragmented in California, I think we need to actually look at the options.
Yeah, Marty Amoto, so I like the section generally. Just want to suggest some things to think about in terms of additions. Well, first of all, to address, you mentioned the issue about not making sure we don't lose the emphasis on older Californians, and that, I understand, can easily happen when things are merged or integrated. And I would suggest maybe we consider, Catherine, you've raised this over time during our meetings about sometimes consider using the word coordination but sometimes that really talks about what we're really trying to do, because integration has all kinds of different meanings, and coordination actually really is an active word, about what we're trying to do here. The only other thing I would add is just what I said before about when we talk about community-based services or local services, mention regional center funded services or regional centers, and also Department of Aging, Social Service, Department of Developmental Services, and there may be, just as examples, and maybe even the mental health services, just because when people read this, they got to know that they're included in this, and that this subcommittee remembered them. And it's just, I'm going to keep mentioning it. If I don't, we just got to make sure they're mentioned. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Marty. I appreciate that comment. Yeah. We have to take a break I know folks need to use the bathroom. Can I take just a quick temperature of this? So, am I correct in assuming that we're good with how this is, and that people have different perspectives on it? Okay.
I don't like it at all.
Right. That's okay, but you're okay with the language. That's what matters. Because these are important discussions to have, and I think what we're saying in this is there needs to be a forum at the state and local level to have this conversation. It's a very important one, because we want to make the system better for the people of the local level too. So, okay, thank you all very much. We will continue the discussion after with Claire, and Catherine will get to us, unveil her magical. We're really excited about that. And, talk to you in what, hold on, how long do we have? 10 minutes?
15
minutes.
I gotta walk.
10 to 4. So, no, like 3:49.
3:49. There is no 49. Oh, what a starting.
Have the discussion with local partners, that's all.
You wouldn't want it, every place, break down the time.
And then I'll,
Okay, good. Claire is going to, you will read it. I'm still part of the journey, yeah. Should we do that first? I think what I'm gonna need to do though is.
You got my email, right?
You know what? I have all your information, yeah. I'll send you an email.
So that's great.
Where's Donna from?
Lydia Hay for her work.
Favorite keepers. I was just saying, like, I didn't even know that center was there. What kind of journey, my various caregiving journeys, I had no idea. Yeah. I live in Glendale, and which is
Oh, my goodness.
Ellicott.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I, yeah.
How you doing?
How you're going to,
Okay, we're gonna get started. Right now, Claire Ramsey is going to talk about, the recommendations that were recommended for referral to other areas. And she can talk about what criteria we use to get to that point and which ones they are, and then we're gonna have a discussion on that. So here you go, Claire.
Are we doing the, I'm sorry, sir, are we doing the section I actually cared about?
We're going to, but we're gonna start with.
That's a little question.
Yes or no?
No, you have to be yes. That's right.
We are gonna do it.
We are gonna go
We're
there.
not-
I just want to get it up here.
Did it state of the stage?
Okay, so walk forward.
Got a fifth.
Are you doing something else?
Yeah.
That's what the best position.
I know, I really didn't want to. Hi, everyone, so we're gonna call the meeting back to order. This is Claire, for those on the phone. So just to be very clear what we're looking at now, there should be a handout that everyone should have access to called items to be referred to another MPA goal. It's up here, does anyone need it? Then Sarah will pass it out. So if anybody needs it, raise your hand. So I want to set a little context for this because this may feel like it came out of, the ether. And so first thing, I want to set some criteria for what this is. So as the editing group was working through this and trying to focus on not only obviously the goals of producing a good report and a meaningful report, but also about brevity and clarity and focus. One of the things that became clear is some of these recommendations are great recommendations. They just did not seem to belong in our LTSS report. And that doesn't mean that they're not meaningful to aging and disability, or that we disagree with them. So that's the first thing I want to be very clear. This is not a list of anything around disagreement. This is not around unimportance. This is around trying to produce a clean report that is within our purview. So to that end, we want to propose to all of you that some of these recommendations should actually go to other groups. And before, I want to be really clear about who those other groups are. So you've probably heard there is a research subcommittee. That subcommittee's already meeting. Carrie is on it. She's down. She knows. That group is already formed up. The other groups that are either being formed or have been formed are involved in what Nina mentioned earlier. There's the age-friendly community. That is goal 2, right? Because we had 4 goals for the master plan for aging. We are goal 1, and that's about living where you choose to live. Goal 2 was about age-friendly communities, so that's work group, we'll call that work group 2. Goal 3 was health and well-being, that's work group 3. And then goal 4 was around safety and economic security, that's work group 4. So when we say we're referring to a work group with a number, that is what we are talking about. So it is formed up within the master plan for aging context. It is part of the stakeholder advisory committee, so staff is responsible for those 3 other goals. And then just to remind everybody what Lydia said at the beginning of this meeting, many hours ago when we started, is that we think that somebody from LTSS should be on every one of those work groups so that we're bringing that perspective and that intersectional perspective into it. And we're also can answer questions, advocate for, et cetera, around these recommendations. So with that said, the first several pages we're going to go through are about referred recommendations to other groups. The last thing at the end we'll touch on is we just wanted to have a holding place for some recommendations that ended up getting merged.
into other recommendations. So you saw that happen today when people said, well, why don't we take, what was it, 4A?
4C.
Yeah, and merge them together, they don't really need to be separate. We just wanted to track that. So there's merged recommendations, which I know some people, I want to be clear, those weren't being deleted or left off, or referred out, they're not, they're just being merged. So how I'm gonna walk, we have 45 minutes for this. Maybe we need it, maybe we don't. I'm hoping they're not controversial, but I do want to say this is an inexact science, right? This was us doing our best to try to find the right size of the buckets for our thing. So people could disagree, but instead of walking through each individual one, I'm going to walk through them by where they're going, where they're being referred to, and then we can talk about any of them within that section, and we'll kind of go through it that way. Just kidding, we don't have 45 minutes because of public comment, so we're just going to be very efficient, 35 minutes. Got to get this talking. Logic game in law school. Okay, so the first one is recommendation, and these numberings go back to the original draft. So recommendation B5 is we are advising that it get referred to the Master Plan for Aging Research Subcommittee. So that subcommittee is all about data evaluation, and that's what this recommendation really was down to. As you can see, it's recommendation 1 is about data and reporting, and recommendation 2, sub-bullet 2, is about evaluation. So any concerns, so can you all live with this getting referred to the research subcommittee?
Yes.
Okay, to refer, okay, got it.
Awesome, thank you, and Lydia, thank you for taking it.
And research is coming to you on March 10th. Okay, so
Yeah, Nina has
all these data things you can keep in your pocket.
I know, Nina and Edie, I know we're getting a little on the weeds. I don't want to lose the CHIP data on long-term supports and services, needs and access. Is that we're also going to be part of that?
That is part of it.
And just so you know, Catherine Keatsman, who is the head of, she's on our research committee.
I know.
Yeah.
And Stacy's there too.
She is, she's a superstar.
It's not gonna get lost.
It isn't.
So, okay, so it sounds like and Carrie knows now, and we will make sure that doesn't get lost, and there's great people on research. Awesome. Okay, moving on. So referring to work group 3, which again is health and well-being. This is not the most. I'm just going to read the recommendations letter and number and then the title and go through those, and then we'll see if anyone has any discussion points on these. So there's several of these. Recommendation C12 is invest in LTSS workforce education and training strategies. C13 is authorize full practice authority for nurse practitioners. C15 is improve access through primary health care and psychiatric positions. C16 is create and professionalize additional paraprofessional positions. C17 is leverage telehealth technology. And C28 is promote completion of advanced directives. And those are the recommendations we are suggesting go over to the work group that will be focused on health and well-being.
Wait, you have it.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong, sorry, I'm looking at my old note-filled version. And the last one is C30, thank you, Donna, is promote early detection of Alzheimer's disease. So those several recommendations we're advising go over to health and well-being subcommittee 3.
Perfect.
Can everyone live with those referrals? Anyone have anything they want to discuss? Okay, Donna, anyone else?
Just because recently the Alzheimer's Association announced that they will be adding Alzheimer's and other dementias, we may want to let that as use the term, the larger, broader term of dementia for detection. That's a good thought. Because that's going to be in everything that Alzheimer's does.
So edit and refer.
Yeah.
Edit and refer.
Okay, so that's an edit and referral, Julia.
Can I just ask what the thought was in moving C12?
So let me look back, and so C12 is the one around LTSS workforce. Yeah.
Focused on professional.
I think it was partially because it was so, yeah, it was more, it was because it was more medical and like a medical pipeline as opposed to the direct care workforce pipeline.
And there is in the report, we did keep the, in the current report that on page 22, we do have expand workforce supply and improve working conditions for the direct care workforce. We kept that in the report.
Anything else that people want to talk about or have questions about, concerns about? And so this was obviously trying to separate things that were too medical out away from our daily life.
And/or should really be grouped with a group of recommendations like the workforce, future healthcare workforce.
Yeah, exactly. Future of healthcare future of healthcare should go to healthcare and well-being for recommendations. Again, these are important recommendations, we just don't think there are recommendations. Okay, so can everyone live with these referred recommendations?
Have you gone on to the next section?
No, just
Okay.
just the work group 3. So these several will go to work group 3, the ones I read out. Oh, sure, of course.
I may have lost track, but what happened to the universal home care worker, recommendation? Is that in the?
I think it's in the merge, so let me just double check. Okay, but somebody can note that the universal
Yeah.
healthcare worker, I think it got merged, so let me just, but we'll come back to it.
Okay. Assuming we answer your question, is everybody good for those referrals? Great, okay. We are zipping along, which is lovely, people. Now we're moving to page...
I'm looking for it.
4, thank you. On the work, MPA Goal 4 work group, which is again, is safety and economic security. And so let me just read where these are. This is C7 sub 2, so some of them got a little broken apart, just wild, complicated numbering. The issue was mitigating access disparities in elder justice. C8, which is improve emergency preparedness response in the LTSS system. I want to be clear, this one, a lot of emergency preparedness ones stayed in our report. It was just these 3 sub-bullets that got suggested to be pulled because they were all broader than just within LTSS. A lot of them involve multiple county-level organizations and managed care and health and regional centers and a lot of other groups. So we thought that they maybe didn't belong within the more specific LTSS recommendations, but otherwise, everything else around emergency preparedness is still in the report, just to be very clear about that. And then, don't worry, I'll get you in one sec. And then the last one we're suggesting for referral is C27, which is strengthen elder independence abuse reports. And just to be clear, when, one of the things that the Safety and Economic Security Committee is working on is the elder justice. That's part of what the safety is about. So questions about these 3 being referred? Anna.
Can you help point me to where the rest, because it's not right, when I looked at it, I was like, oh, that's not the complete recommendation, at least the current version. Yeah, so on C8 that was referred, where are the other?
I will find it for you. I'm doing a search right now.
Okay.
Goodness, for people.
It's 2E on page 15 and 16 are all the other emergency response and preparedness.
And there's some on page 8 of the merged.
Great.
Within 8, under the ADRC, that stayed there, and then the other ones got.
2, and 2E has quite a bit.
I need to read it more in depth, this part, and just making, we did the presentation today, and there was, I pulled, there's public comments that CDA has been tracking that I had not really looked at before. So I may add just a couple little recommendations here based on going through additional comments.
Yeah, so just in your mind, think about LTSS V more broad, and we can edit those in.
And just in case people couldn't hear what Lydia said on the phone, is Anna's going to go through them and just with an eye toward LTSS versus sort of more broad emergency preparedness and response recommendations. Karen,
Are you going to go through the merged recommendations as well?
I will, but after this one.
No problem. Oh, wait.
Anyone else on these 3 recommendations being referred over to work group 4? Can everyone live with those? Oh, sorry.
The elder abuse particularly elder abuse reporting, we add the word "and response."
It's just within that recommendation for the referral.
Yeah, because I think part of the issue is particularly the reporting, we're also making sure that folks who are required to respond. That's the problem.
Good, that's very good.
And thank you, Lydia, you're capturing that for me.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. All right, it looks like we can live with this with the caveat that Anna is going to review more closely and get back to me on comments, related to specifically those 3 bulleted points on emergency preparedness and response. Great. Okay, you guys, looks like I'm a gas now.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got it.
So let me walk you through the merge issues last. And so first things first, and I know I'm reiterating, but I just want to be abundantly clear. The merge recommendations are merged, meaning they have not disappeared, they were not deleted, we believe they were duplicative in some way with another recommendation, or the ideas kind of belong together, and so we merged them together. You'll see, I know it's tiny, but in the track changes on the comments, it tells you where it got merged to. So I'll read that out just again. So recommendation B6, which was advanced innovation, we merged with the recommendation around a Medi-Cal Medicare dual integration office, which is recommendation 1F in the new report. Recommendation C25, which is simplify administration of the IHSS program for recipients. There was another separate recommendation very similar. We merged those two, and now that recommendation is 1G. On the last page, on page 8, recommendation C26, which is improved emergency backup systems for IHSS. That got merged with the larger LTSS emergency preparedness and resources recommendation under 2E, so all those bullet points just got moved there. And then on recommendation C29, which is promote completion of advanced directives for those with cognitive impairment, that got merged with C28, which is being referred to the health and well-being work group, the work group 3. So those were the 4 that basically, when we sort of went through everything, felt like they could be merged and streamlined. Any questions? Karen, you had a question about that.
Thank you. So my area of expertise on emergency backup systems. So you had said that the C26 got merged with 2E, but it's not there. So, like, for example, the one that's really important to me that yes.
They are, oh, I think you don't have the most, oh, so can I?
Yeah.
So this is confusing. We sent out the report initially, and we forgot to integrate those 3 bullets on the IHSS into the, we said we merged, but we didn't physically merge. So if you look at the most updated one Sarah sent yesterday, that's why we resent it. So those are now renumbered. 2E4, 2E5, 2E6 became those 3 IHSS recommendations, and the other ones got pushed down.
Right. So where is the plan? So we rewrote that a little bit to require county IHSS social workers to review personal emergency plans annually to update data for emergency response. And part of it was because there was a little sense of like, it wasn't clear how the report was, we talked about outcomes, how do you encourage people to do this through the report, so we were hoping if you made social workers have to go through it with them, then it would sort of.
Is that possible that's already started?
No. Oh. So we were hoping that was a way to get at it, which is, you don't make the individuals have to do it, but you make the social worker have to review it. So, for us, in our experience, so what I called it originally was a personal emergency plan for the IHSS consumers.
It's page 16, Karen.
Yes, no, I have it here, but it says encourage staff member to, require county IHSS soldiers to review personal emergency plans. That doesn't sound like to me it's necessarily for the clients, or for the consumers. It's, so I don't. Yeah, so it's like, is it for themselves, is it for the county?
Okay, got it.
So that's something, so I'll look at those languages.
Yeah,
I do my editing. Thank you. Okay. This is on 2E of the most recent report,
Yeah, I just caught that.
So we made a note, Karen, you'll send us edits on that.
Right, so the answer on that is, everybody take a look at that, especially people who have, vested interest in that particular recommendation, and at minimum, Karen will send us some language.
So I don't know why I didn't catch this particular recommendation before, so maybe it's new, which the requiring to review annually.
Yeah, it's rewarded to be more.
Okay, so I just want to point out, I mean, and this is a pretty well-established thing, and I just asked, those forms are pretty useless. Most people, like, put, like, the name of someone who lives in Montana, like, if they don't have anyone else. So I don't know that it does anything, honestly.
Is there a way we could broaden that recommendation maybe to be like, improve
Yes,
the,
because
It's a different thing.
it's a different thing. This is something specific after our 2017 fires, we developed specifically for personal plans. So I can be more specific in that.
It's not the ZIPCO requirement.
Right.
It's not more than
Okay, got it.
Correct.
so for those, just so everybody knows, so is two things happening. One is Sonoma, it sounds like they've done something that's very like best practices, cutting edge.
Oh, great.
That's what we're talking about versus what exists now, which might be pretty, meaningless. So,
Karen, fees, is that only in Sonoma?
No.
It's, I don't know how many counties are doing it, but.
Napa, Butte.
Yeah, Napa, I know.
But it's not is it mandated?
No.
No, last year when there was a
Anybody who's had a fire.
power shut-off,
Yeah, good.
all of the county agencies, CSAC, CWDA, CAPA, the health execs, everybody encouraged people that lived there to have personal plans in place so that they could evacuate if they needed to and would have their medications. That's what's being referenced here.
Yeah.
It's not the worthless one-page
No, I
form
get that.
that's tied to us getting federal money.
I guess what I mean is it simply there for counties that want to use it, but it's not
Both of
mandated?
the counties and the public authorities all partnered together to contact people who were medically fragile and identified as such by the utilities. So this is, go on.
It is not required. It is not required for counties to contact the PG&E baseline or the Empower group from the Medicare. We're trying to figure it out.
So is this saying it should be required?
This is saying it should be required, at least the individual personal plan, not the form,
Right.
but the actual plan for emergencies. And those of us, Butte, Sonoma, Napa, those of us who've had fires recently,
Butte,
are-
Santa Barbara,
Yes.
LA, there were a bunch of them.
all fire zones.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it sounds like, though,
Yes.
we have something we
That's
could
why-
very
why-
specifically reference that
Yeah.
we're suggesting state adoption.
Okay, thank you.
That's great, okay, thank you for that clarification, I didn't realize that was a different one. Anything else people want to ask or talk about with merge recommendation?
Mhm.
Very good. Thank you, guys. Awesome, you guys. So those changes now, and is it helpful to have this as an appendix or not? It feels like it's okay.
Internal only, yeah,
Internal.
yeah,
And
yeah.
So when you don't
It's too
see them
confusing.
anymore, it's because we have appropriately referred them and you can all not worry about them anymore. Here.
Oh, wait, Karen.
So it's not on this, which I think you all and Claire did a really great job. My question is that, so we had 800 billion recommendations or emails or papers that came in, whatever it was, and I think at some point that I was told there would be some kind of an appendix or something that would list who submitted a paper, just like at least their name, so that people know that it was looked at.
They were heard, yeah.
And I remember that being brought up at some point, that we didn't have to incorporate all of the recommendations because there'd be this separate listing, and people would know that it had been checked. So is that being done? I can help, I'm happy to help.
We have all the sources, so that's the good news. So, yeah, maybe we can talk about that.
Well, no,
Like putting in footnotes?
Said,
The state would take responsibility. Okay, good.
Carrie's like,
Kim said the state will take responsibility for making sure that every recommendation and every comment that was submitted is recognized.
Good. Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you.
And, I mean, I'll just add,
Hang on.
so as a writing captain, so, and this is also for the benefit of anyone listening in, writing captains get to see all the comments, all the recommendations. So it's not just going into a black box somewhere we actually.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, everybody knows that.
we all got that.
Everybody knows
Dropbox.
that.
after that.
Okay. All right, well, great, so I'm gonna turn it back to Sarah to go to nurse delegation.
Okay, thank you, that was very exciting. All right, so we want to get through two things, ideally three. We want to do the nurse delegation, and then we want to talk about this new recommendation to make sure that it's framed appropriately. And then if we can, to start the priorities discussion in terms of when we can continue that discussion, because I think that it will be really critical for our work. So, thank you to Catherine very much for drafting this up, and to Karen for helping out. Do you want to read it, or do you want me to?
Can I just say one thing about it?
Please.
So things are always more complicated than they seem, and it is not clear at this moment to Claire and I where the limitation actually comes from, because the Nurse Practice Act actually allows delegation,
Right,
right?
right.
But it might be a scope of practice problem.
It is.
So, right? So we need to understand in what regulations the scope of practice. Excellent. So if you have them on your phone, well, whoever they are, you can send them to us. So I think, we can read this, which is sort of a general what it's gonna be, and I think it captures the agreement of, maybe I'll just focus on the recommendation, because I think the issue is still a little muddy, although we tried to talk about how family caregivers provide this when it's prescribed by a physician, and this allows people to do these kinds of services, but other people currently, it seems, can't do those, and then we're a little unclear why they can't, so that's what we have to sort out. So the recommendation is to revise state regulations, which is where we think the problem is not in the law, to allow CNAs, home health aides, and there's one other category we think in this regulation, to provide health care tasks, thank you, my handwriting, prescribed by a physician with appropriate training and supervision.
Perfect.
That's the gist of it.
Perfect. So I guess what we need to do is get the core of the problem about, because it is confusing, this has been part of it. It's like there's regs, and then there's other
Scope of
practice
practice.
documents, and
I sent it to you.
so, to be determined. I really appreciate this, the one thing I think is the issue statement needs to be clear about why this is a problem, so we can, but I like to,
What the problem is, then we can add.
Claire are gonna.
So I'll send you info, and I might loop Heather Young into it.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I've been in contact with her about it. Oh, so I'm gonna let them, so if they can send anything, like that. Okay, good, well, that's great, thank you very much, we're almost there on this one, so I appreciate that thoughtful discussion.
Can you, summarize that again real fast.
So here's what we're doing.
Claire and
This
Catherine.
language right now, we all feel like could be good. We just want to make sure that it's accurately reflecting the real problem and that we're not missing something. So we are going to seek the advice of professionals who have studied this. They're going to get back to us with the information. We're going to, let's reconvene in the morning or something to make sure that that everybody's good, and then we'll put it in the edit, and then everybody can review it to make sure they're okay with it. Does that work for everybody?
Yeah.
Claire and Nina and Donna, I'm just throwing your Donna in there, she's in every other statement.
Yeah.
And Catherine, Karen, if you want to be part of that, those are the folks. So Claire, Catherine, Karen, Nina.
She does everything.
Not Donna.
Not Donna, no.
Okay, so there we are on that. Good. Okay, so the next thing we wanted to highlight, and I want to give maybe up to 10 minutes on it so we can maybe have a little time for a prioritization discussion about what we're going to do. So what happened was Lydia and Claire, I think, said, the financing section, it really is, the bulk of it really ended up being the LTSS benefit, which is great because it's a big issue, ensuring that people who are not on Medi-Cal have a way of funding LTSS. However, we have a much bigger funding issue in our state, which is that we don't have adequate funding for home and community-based services. Everybody has recognized that. We know that whenever there's a budget crisis, these are the first programs to get cut. Part of it stems from the fact that there's an entitlement to institutional care, but not to home and community-based services. That's a federal entitlement. We do know that the state has made entitlements for certain programs, such as IHSS, if you meet the eligibility criteria. And the Developmental Disability Service System has beautifully structured a system that provides home and community-based services as an entitlement to people with developmental disabilities. So we thought, well, why, this has been such a significant issue for our system. Let's be bold and say, we need to make it a right for people to access home and community-based services. So the challenge was, and I appreciated Lydia bringing this up, she said, well, wait, if we have a broad entitlement for all home and community-based services, which that sounds wonderful, I think the Department of Finance might not think it, but we all believe in that strongly, then with the work on the LTSS benefit, you don't have a need for an LTSS benefit because HCBS are all paid for already by the system. So does everybody understand that challenge here? You have this universal LTSS benefit that affords people, say, up to a certain dollar amount per day, up to a certain cap for the front end part of their long-term care needs. You don't really need an LTSS benefit if the state already pays for all home and community-based services, unless it's structured to be a payer of last resort like the DD system does. So that's one way to address it. So what we did is we structured it as an entitlement under Medi-Cal to get at that issue that Lydia had raised. But as Catherine said, that doesn't feel bold enough. So I'm now thinking, well, what if we structured it to be an entitlement, but to make it an entitlement where if there's any other funding source that could pay for that services, or that service, that service would be, that the funding under this would be the payer of last resort. So I want to turn to Catherine because she knows a lot about this, given her expertise in the developmental disabilities and
So I actually thought you did a very nice job summarizing it, and I think the solution of being clear in the states like a payer of last resort is the solution, because it was never intended to say, if you have private long-term care insurance that's going to provide the services you need, that the state's going to pay for them instead, right?
Okay.
That would make absolutely no sense, and so we can, I mean, if there's sort of language that can be added about you have to access other resources, but something like that, makes it clear, but, yes. And then I think it's sort of like, we put out something bold, it seems to me there's also lots of ways that it can be implemented, right? Mm-hmm. So the state may say, we're not going to be creating a right, I called it a right, not an entitlement, but an entitlement for millionaires, that's ridiculous, right? Well, then you start by saying, okay, but it can't just be people that are Medicaid eligible. It needs to be 200% of poverty level or 400% of poverty level, like the Affordable Care Act is, or a variety of other things. But I probably wouldn't get into all the weeds of that. Say you have to use other resources, and then and then you can base.
Okay, so maybe what we can do with that one is, I can take a stab at some edits and send it to you, and then what we'll do is all of these edits is you'll see them reflected in here, so you can review this language. But before that, I want to make sure, are there others who have comments, Nina? And then
I have a question,
Peter?
and I have a question.
Okay.
So,
I'm over here.
I wrote that to kind of hold it, and I'd love to hear. I did mention on the call on Friday, Washington did an instruct that they did do a waiver up to 400% poverty. I will get just an example, that's just one little piece of the puzzle. I'd even say, you know, California is going up to 600% this year. So really being bold and trying to match that.
I think that's a good idea, actually.
Yeah.
Oh, Craig.
Okay, so I saw Peter and Lydia. Do you want me to start here with Craig and then go over? Okay.
Yeah, right here. The one nice thing about that too is it does get to the underlying issue we've had about people talk about the forgotten middle.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Right.
That's a great point. Good point about the forgotten middle. Okay, good. That's right. Okay, Lydia, and then
So a question for Catherine. So Catherine, one of the things we were talking about too was that we have these artificial caps on waiver programs, for example, that are funded by Medi-Cal. Mm-hmm. So is there a way that we can address that with the same and right kind of thing? Okay.
There is, because, like in Lanterman, because Lanterman Act has the entitlement to home and community-based services, their waiver cap isn't even met because they have made, the DD waiver is so high that it doesn't achieve a cap. Do you want to clarify that?
No. I just want, I agree with what Lydia said, that I think there's a way to be
We can address it.
about it as well, like, you know, within this stuff, I mean, under financing, Nina's, sorry.
Yeah.
Under financing, Nina's idea of saying you're eligible for Medi-Cal, essentially at 600% of poverty level, maybe with some sort of share of cost or something, that's a separate financing thing that we should put in there. So I think there's a way to take this sort of right and then beef up the financing pieces and then speak to the elimination, specifically to the elimination of caps on waiver slots, which are completely counterintuitive to a right.
And we do have stuff about, HCBS expansion in the access section.
We do.
Yes, that's right, HCBS expansion. Okay, Peter.
I'm thinking you might want to add language about in the CD system, you have to utilize generic services first, and they're available. And if we use language like that, that's already language the legislature, the LAO, and the Department of Finance are already used to, and that might move it forward.
Thank you. Excellent. Okay, Marty, and then Nina. Okay.
Thanks for facilitating this too, and that's it's an important issue, and I would, echo Craig, what you were saying about the forgotten middle, but and Patty, you've mentioned this too, but in terms of our strategy of getting California to buy into what we're trying to do, never mind the administration, we can't forget a huge segment that are being ignored or have been ignored in any solution regarding long-term services, right? So there's got to be a way for us to do that. What I don't know if we've identified is what number of people are we talking about? I mean, we've identified the non-insured, people who don't may not have private insurance or people who are not Medi-Cal eligible, but what population are we talking about? What number of over the poverty level that if we're going to do that, what are we trying to achieve? So if it's trying to reduce disparities and achieve equity, that might be a goal in and of itself, and narrow the focus, or maybe we don't. I don't know the scope that what we're talking about. I do think it's an important thing, though, that we address the people who don't have any other coverage. And you said this from the beginning, Patty, that we cannot forget those people. And the governor, by the way, in the state identified the homeless issue, but they identified it in terms of numbers of people now, how they've seen it as a crisis. And so I think that's what we have to do as well.
Okay. I wonder if we could refer that to the research committee.
Yeah, that actually is a research.
That's a great idea. Slide that for discussion on the 10th with the research committee. Okay, Nina.
Thank you. Just a couple of quick comments. Peter, thank you. Among some of the older California advocates, you may recall, I've been talking about some kind of Clinton-ish act. Everyone looked at me like I was crazy. So, thank you. And appreciate also Marty's comments about the missing middle. This is something that I think a lot of older Californians and younger Californians who face a disability could look at it and say, this I can relate to. This helps me.
Right.
I get this.
Absolutely.
Okay, great.
All right. And I just want to add that, like, the caregiver resource center system was based on the, we're supposed to pick up after that system, and we don't have taxes. We do have respite, and it is, for all numbers, after you're not on HSS eligible. So we have that model, and so we have some of that in legislation too.
Yeah.
And so.
Good. Okay.
Okay, well, we have a public comment.
Because we have a half hour, can we have a little, for right now, the public comment. Okay, so if we don't have a lot of public comment and there's still time, can we come back to have the prioritization discussion?
I just make one comment.
Yeah, and then I'm gonna hand it to Terry to do the public comment, or to Joe, I'm not sure.
Joe, do you want to do something?
Okay, so I'm so glad Marty just said what he said. So the governor gave a state of the state today. All he talked about was homelessness. He got a 15-minute standing ovation. That is going to be his priority. That's what's going to get the money. So we need to weave homelessness throughout this report. And I'm sorry to say, but it's gotta be there. Because that is a population.
Yeah, it is, but it
become
isn't
homeless.
very
And that's
prominent.
one of the hooks.
Yeah.
It's one of the potential hooks.
Yeah.
Claire? Is there anybody
Yeah.
else?
That's why I had brought that up, public comment.
Public comment? Oh, I was.
Okay, who has a clicker? Can we, somebody already, so we're gonna go into public comment now, and, we're gonna start in the room. And, look, and we're going to ask that everyone keep their public comment to 2 minutes. Thank you very much.
Good job.
You guys rock. I'm not gonna live under a bridge because of the work you're doing today, and my children thank you for that. Two comments. One, with regards to what's staying in, under the section, it starts on page 16, goes into page 16, under improved emergency preparedness and response. You don't have anything in here about our licensed care facilities, and I don't know if that's because you think it's covered somewhere else, but,
Which kind?
licensed long-term care facilities, assisted living, the RCFEs, the ARFs, the skilled nursing, they have a response in emergency preparedness. They need to have a role in it. Families need to know where their loved ones are gonna be sent if the facility has to be, evacuated. Law enforcement needs to know if an assisted living facility is gonna be taking their people to a homeless shelter. All of that, some kind of reference in here with your emergency response. And then under the section, I've got less than a minute now, that's being referred away. While it's still in your draft, recommendation C-27, strengthening elder and dependent adult reporting. One, I thought we were getting away from dependent abuse, elders and dependents, and we were changing to disabled adults, so I didn't know if that was a clarification here. But also, glaring disparities between counties in their response to elder abuse, neglect, and exploitation, the mandate to provide adult protective services and long-term care ombudsman services is underfunded. County support for local programs vary widely. That is true for the ombudsman program as well as for ADF. A lot of your recommendations on how to improve access to the community for elder abuse reporting would apply also to the ombudsman program.
Somebody else.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Terry Hill. I'm a geriatrician.
Yeah.
And been involved in, home and community-based services for a long time. I'm also a reluctant caregiver these days. So I, two comments. One is, I like the notion of the chili pepper, saying, it's really important. Another sort of marker, which is this recommendation will save money. And, for instance, all programs, adult day health, this will save money because all of this report says, please give us more money. We should take it out of the medical care system. And actually, Carrie, why don't you get the research committee to take this on the way in the I was on the aging subcommittee of the California Future Health Workforce Committee, and we had data to document how we would save money. So, the other piece, and please don't say this is all medical, but end of life care. I know Dr. Ruffalo raised this at the last meeting, and you've all met Sharon Spadden from San Francisco. In the Department of Adult and Aging Services, there has, for a goodly number of years now, there has been a palliative care work task force. The goals of many, but including improving access to palliative care and care planning. In order to do that, that's not a medical delivery system thing. No. That's a community thing that this community, that you all as leaders need to take on. It involves extended, deep engagement with, in San Francisco, the multiple San Francisco communities. So anyway, it occurred to me as a 131st recommendation to be for, by the way, to ensure that no wrong door includes culturally responsive referrals to palliative care services in all of them,
I like it.
So just a thought, just to get this in there, because you have to own our failures. You know, we failed in many of our community organizations to recognize that we almost died, and we could use some tender loving care.
Probably on that word.
Yeah, our center.
Hi, I'm Carmen Grava.
You don't call it Haley.
She's supposed to.
To get paid for it, or?
Yeah, here we go. Okay. I'm Carmen Bremer, and I'm a caregiver right now, and I'm also a commissioner on the Santa Clara County Senior Care Commission. And a couple of things that I feel like I would love to see in this document, which I think is a great start, is also something that you said earlier, is the licensing facilities. On your two key recommendations, you're not listing the skilled nursing care facilities, you're not listing the assisted living or the board of care. And those are critical. I've been through all of these, and it's been quite an experience. And much as we all like to age in home, the reality is you may need to use other facilities, so it's important that they be included as part of it. And the other thing that I really, really want to encourage us to do, and I'm happy to be part of this, is outreach and messaging to the public at large. This is not getting out there, and in order to get the support that we want and to make it a priority, is getting the public engaged in this. And I'm happy to share ideas and get involved in doing any of that, because this is very critical to me. After what I've gone through with my mom, or what I'm continuing to go through with my mother, it is super, super important, and that's why I'm here today. And I will come out here to these meetings in person, because it's a little difficult to do it all the time.
Thank you very, very much.
I don't actually normally speak, I'm sitting in the back, but I wanted to raise a couple points today. My name is Liz, and I am actually the chief consultant to the Aging and Long-Term Care Committee. So I come and really grasp a lot of knowledge from all of you while I'm sitting here, but I have a very strong recommendation that we are continuing to say around the table that the government and the legislature doesn't care about aging issues. We're perpetuating that by continuing to say it. I have staff, I have people calling constantly who are trying to make change in this area. So you have a lot of support. You may not be seeing it yet, but the fact that there is a stakeholder group happening, there is support there. So I really encourage you to keep a more positive model and to write this as though you do have the support. I also, I understand that you're trying to write this from the governor's perspective because this is by an executive order, but ultimately this is a tool that legislators will use, and they're an equal branch of government. So I think that, I have said this to a lot of you around the table, next year's bill package is going to be really easy. There will be this great, beautiful report that you're going to release in October, and I'm going to be able to take and put in Ledge Council language in November. And come December and January, there will be all sorts of legislative proposals that members will be able to take knowing they have the support of the government and they made it into this report. But your report should look like your dream report. Because I want to take that report and take everything that didn't make it into the final and take all of the cutting room scraps, and that's what I get to use for you. And so I say that because never before has there been a brain trust like this. And I will be able to justify those pieces of legislation because all of you found a way to agree that this was the best practice moving forward. Don't underestimate the power that you have. Thank you. It is immense. My background was in gender policy. So I feel like our greatest successes in the Women's Caucus was saying every issue is a woman's issue. And you need to frame it that every issue that relates to aging and those with a disability, their human rights issues, they're issues that impact everyone in California. So stop making it just an aging issue, and I know that Assemblywoman Berg, who I've worked for before, recognize her style. The guts of this report are what justify there being a standing committee in both houses. And also, the impact of what we do around this table will also justify how we can expand the jurisdictional roles of both of those committees to find ways to say, actually, the subject matter needs to expand ever so slightly because this is a population that does touch multiple areas. Also, would just like to thank Peter Mendoza for being at this table. My greatest aha moments have come from the comments that you said. Shows your character, you chose to thank your caregiver today. But this process is strengthened because you have users at the table. As a person who works in the council, I get great access to all of you as people who work in the policy world, to lobbyists and to advocates. I can find my way to you, but it's very, very hard to find your way to someone who is using a system. And most often, you are hearing from people who are having a problem with the system, and that's the reason to hear from them. So thank you for being a part of this process. You're one of the most important people. Thank you. Okay, are we gonna go to telephone? Do we have people on the telephone?
Yeah, we have 3 people with their hand raised, so we'll start with, I'll tell Joy. I've hand up for a while, so go ahead and jump in.
They hear you?
Okay, people will come back. Randy, Dick?
Hello, how are you guys doing? Good. Okay, so this is Randy Hicks from Californians with Disability Rights, and I would like to under the discrimination portion of the program. I didn't see anything about the LGBTQ community. You guys were talking about racial discrimination. You were talking about sexism, and you were talking about a lot of discrimination. Could you please add LGBTQ to that?
Thank you. Thank you for your comment. We hear you and we appreciate your comment.
Okay, and one more. It came from Kara. Kara has sent you a letter on behalf of the California Alliance for Retired Americans, and I'll make this short. Regarding the first draft, we would like to recommend recommendation D1, a statewide public LTS benefit that would model after Washington's LTSS Trust Fund, a model that includes vesting a period for eligibility that is exclusively funded by a payroll tax. Such a funding vesting period would exclude benefits from all currently retired Californians, all Californians in retirement, even though they would pay the payroll tax. Some Californians would miss work to provide LTS, some gig workers, some undocumented workers, and some children with disabilities. The impact on the currently retired Californians alone would mean unnecessarily spending down to Medi-Cal and foregone or inadequate LTSS for many. CARA supports a California public LTS insurance plan. However, it would likely increase the grassroots support of the CATs, and would give this plan, if we're designed to benefit the bulk of their members, we recommend that a California public LTS insurance plan not include a vesting period, and to help cover the cost, the plan will include a revenue source in addition to payroll taxes. Nan Bresmer, CARA president, and the letter has been sent to you guys.
Thank you so much.
Okay. And lastly, we've got, Bill Steve?
Bill Steve, are you there?
Yes, I am. How are all of you today?
You have the floor. No, we can't hear you very well. Bill?
I think Bill might have stepped away.
Okay. He was there for a second.
Yeah.
All right.
That's it.
Okay. Maybe I should say. So, we have a little bit of time left for next steps. And can I just say very quickly, there's a couple of next steps that need to happen. One of those is the presentation, the webinar presentation to SAC on February 26th. 7 days away. My recommendation would be that we have our lovely writers give that presentation.
Yeah, didn't work.
So we need to, I don't know if anybody has any thoughts about that?
I second that.
Or just Craig can do it. How about Craig does it?
I recommend,
Do you guys have capacity? Do you need help?
Yeah.
Yeah, depends what it is, yeah.
There'll need to be a slide presentation. It can be simple. It can go, it could follow the 5 objectives and just to go through the report and.
we would all be on it, but I think you guys
Well,
would want to be there.
let's confer and we may call on.
Okay. And then the other next step, and I think it's the, maybe the elephant in the room, maybe not, is that when we went around in our reflections, about half of the people here said we need to prioritize, and there was a lot of good ideas today. I really do think it's a pivot point of a time when we need to kind of stop, maybe pause on the wordsmithing and move into prioritizing. And as hard as that is to do, we have, SAC meeting on this on March 2nd. I really like the idea of, I think Craig had kind of sort of this case mix of what are some low-hanging fruit, some cheap things that are easy for the governor, what are some things that are big, bold asks. So that's just throwing out there, we have March 10th as a in-person meeting, and that could be a time when we move forward on that. I think SAC is also going to ask for that. I mean, I can't say what SAC's going to do, but the last time that SAC talked about the LTSS report, they asked for the 5 big ideas. So.
And I do think the 5 big ideas are good.
Hand it off.
Yeah, okay, Craig has a comment.
Sure.
Do
you want to? No, yeah, why don't we take their
Take it to
questions,
Craig.
and then Susan, maybe, have ideas about them.
I'm just trying to think how to skim this issue.
I know, we need
What if,
criteria.
and this is something I mentioned to Lydia during the break, what if we create a matrix of all the recommendations? I mean, by the topic, and
The number and the heading.
the number in the heading, and then whatever the little caption of it, the thing is. And, I don't know how else to do this. I think a couple of things, you could do a couple of different things. You could also do something, you could use that matrix in part to identify things that you think are almost not ranking them, but you could almost put things down that we think are gonna be a lot of money, things that are gonna save, things that are gonna be things you could do within existing resources, that's the financial aspect to it. But we could also use that to identify what each of us think are the priorities.
The voting?
Like almost a voting, but almost like a 1, 2, 3 kind of thing,
Right.
A couple of different buckets. I'm just trying to think of what makes it simpler around this kind of thing,
Yeah,
because there's
it's
so
hard.
many of these things. I don't know.
I want to build on what you're saying.
Can I just ask, before I say that, so we are doing edits and sending to you now, right? Okay,
Yeah.
be clear. Okay, and you wanted us to try and change it?
Through Friday, close of business. And if it's a small edit, just cut and paste it into an email, that's a lot
And I
easier than
think
getting
people
a
on
ton
this
of.
group, send them straight to the
Directly.
writers. It'd be great if you CC'd me. But for public comment, we're taking public
Right.
comment to close of business on Friday, and that goes to the Engage Age email, and please put LTSS report in your subject line.
Okay, so edits, track changes to the 3 of you, ASAP. Okay, got it. So my recommendation, building off of what Craig just said, is what if the writing captains, choose the categories and take it back to the writing teams to categorize, meaning that, so we said we wanted to put some kind of timeline together. So what if the timeline is 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever, right? So we've got those categories. I really wanna push for specificity, requires legislative action, yes, no. Can be done through administrative action, yes, no. Funding required, yes, no. Do we wanna add a projected estimate or not, just leave it as yes or no? Savings could be, would result, yes, no. So if you guys determine, based on what we all talked about today, these are the things that these recommendations all need to be added, and then this is how you do it. You want it color-coded, urgency.
We'll figure it out, yeah.
So then you kick it back to us who wrote the recommendations and let us meet as our little group to say, this is what the group recommends be the prioritization.
Can I ask one question about that?
Yeah.
How are you imagining that now that things have been so heavily reconfigured? Like, I get, like, the ISSS group is easy because.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
But like, there
They've
was
been regrouped.
different- These aren't functionally organized the same way anymore?
Can we just very quickly reconstitute then based on the 5 buckets?
What if you wanna make comments on another section?
Yeah,
I'd kind of like, just,
adding everyone into.
yeah, just everybody, what if there's.
I'm trying to relieve work from the three.
I know, it's okay. It's like a sprint now. We're gonna sprint to the finish line. I have a thought based on that, Christina. So I was thinking if we could agree on some criteria today, that then we could reflect back to you quickly for, we're even thinking about maybe doing a quick check-in call Friday morning, early, 8 o'clock? 8 o'clock? Can't do it?
Oh,
No?
8 o'clock?
Oh, okay. Anyway, we just want to get reflect back to you, and then we could use those criteria to set up a way that either is reconfiguring the groups or, getting it out to you in a way in a SurveyMonkey format or something where you can go, something like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
But could we also add, besides the criteria you and Craig have articulated, what Anna keeps bringing up and what I care a lot about, which is this recommendation going to make a difference quickly to the people in the community whose lives we're trying to impact? So that probably goes with how long might it take to implement something, but some of that we can't judge, because if there's funding, we could do it quickly, or if there's a regulatory change, we could do it quickly. So just, if we could have some criteria from you, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure this out because it's so many recommendations.
Yeah.
And I do worry that people, understandably, will just rank like the things that matter to them or that they understand the most, the highest. And then you end up with like,
Criteria would be good.
you end up maybe with 1 or 2 shining through, but then like everything else coming in, like it got 3 votes, like 45 recommendations got 3 votes. And, and then what do we do with that? Is there a way, and we've talked about like whether if one comes from each objective area or something like that, and maybe that's not the right criteria, but is there something we could talk about now while we're all together for a few more minutes that isn't just straight up voting? Maybe it comes down to voting at some point when there's a more organized, a smaller list or something?
Can't they be prioritized within the bucket so that it's not one big massive list?
Maybe, but again, timing is part of the problem.
We don't have a lot of time.
There's not a lot of time, and also, even if, say, like, the 4 of us did something, you guys might all disagree, right? So then, there's all that, like, meeting back and forth. Run over my own.
Okay, we need some more ideas.
All right, Karen and Karen have this.
Karen?
Oh, I had my thing up.
Oh, Marty, yeah.
Karen, Marty.
Yeah, which,
So my idea is to keep the report as it is, present it through the date, and then to indicate that our next step is to do that. I think it's a really thoughtful, important thing, and that we need time for some dialogue. I totally agree with what Claire is saying, that I want to vote for the things that my organization put forward. I feel an obligation to do that. Sure. But on the other hand, there are other things that could, quote, make a difference sooner or be done faster or whatever. So I would ask for us to be able to intersect with the staff very quickly after the report, after we've had some time to figure that out.
Can I just say, in the report out on February 26th, you could also ask SACs to consider certain things in terms of process, right? So we want to continue working with you on things that we've referred to goal 2, 3, 4. We want to, you know, we want to have some time to keep conferring about the big ideas, the immediate asks, and those sorts of things. So,
We've got the big
no,
idea.
we have the big ideas, sorry, not using that term. I didn't use that term just now.
I completely agree with Claire and with Karen. I mean, we all are gonna vote for where we sit, right? So, and I don't think we should vote for things that are cheap or easy. So has to be different, so I don't know, avoiding, you know, of ranking 130, you know, that seems unlikely, but we could do, as was mentioned earlier, tiers, like what is a high priority, what do we all agree is a high priority, a medium and a low? And then many things can be high priority, medium priority, and low. In my chili pepper analogy, could be a red pepper, a yellow pepper, and a green pepper.
She's really pushing that with peppers.
I love peppers.
This is Marty, and yeah, actually, when you read a menu at a Chinese restaurant, I always look for the things that are,
Peppers.
and I don't get those things.
Oh.
I just want to say, going back, I totally agree, Karen, with your point, and Claire, that we don't want to be pushed to make priorities based on a deadline that is largely artificial.
Right.
That we want to be thoughtful about it. We can't, you know, get angry at the administration or the legislature if their process is not as thoughtful as it needs to be for all the work that we put into this report. And so if we value the ideas in this report, the recommendations, we should value that we need time. Maybe not a long time, but we can't do it under the time pressure, like Claire, as you pointed out, and Karen, as you pointed as well, and both Karens actually.
Karen squared.
Both the Karens.
Karen squared.
Yeah, Karen squared. But I do want to say that I think the ranking, that we go back to the governor's executive order, but also going back to where we've come from as advocates, that a lot of the things that we should do, and Anna, you brought this up, and Lydia, but I brought it up as well, and Peter and others, is it needs to be person-centered. So if you focus in on what difference it makes, that will lead us to the priority, right? So there are urgent things here that will impact people. It's not even necessarily immediately that, you know, like the dollar tag will play into this, but what are the urgent things that are going to impact Californians right now that they are in desperate need of? So if you look at the fires that happened or the homeless crisis, what's the first thing you do to address that? I mean, and so there's an urgent thing that we do, and we can identify those things. As long as we stay focused on the person, I think, yeah, we're going to make mistakes, but that should be the thing that we should center policy making on. And then, of course, there's other factors that will flow into that, you know, money and all the other regulatory and passage of certain laws, but we, as advocates, need to focus in on the person.
So many of these.
I will never look at a Chinese menu without thinking about you. Your touch, that's your legacy, right?
That's right.
So I do agree with the recommendation not to decide on priorities this week. If I heard Terry correctly, she said March 10th. Obviously, we do it way ahead of that, but that doesn't mean by Friday.
No, no,
Right,
no, no.
Okay.
I mean, March 10th is after SAC, so SAC is
That's
going
a
to make
long
some
way.
decisions about the report.
Then we have equity.
And they'll have their input, they'll have inputs and ideas of their own.
And we do need to really, I would say, at least begin to congeal around some priorities before that, because, there may be some opportunities to advance some things in the spring, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, right.
Smart.
So, I just agree with that, in terms of process, and I don't know how we vote for things, I have no idea. I agree, I mean, I know what my priorities are, but, I think it's so important that we hear from the stakeholder advisory committee, so we don't have to, that's all.
But again, be clear on the 26th that you want more time after they see it.
But not
Short
much more
amount of time, a short amount of time.
Yeah.
Still has to be done by the end of March 31st, but
So our March 10th meeting is critical.
Then that's.
And we did not know
our priorities, our recommendations until today in order to prioritize them.
Yeah, where do you need to be?
Landed
Right?
on the list of 130.
And get all the edits and have a nice, clean report.
That's
In the font.
I love your thought process that you're gonna say this in front of the staff.
I
Well,
always
and there's
like
members
any
of the
reason
staff
to kick
on
things
the
down the road a
subcommittee,
little.
right?
Yeah.
So,
I was just gonna raise the possibility that, I'm not sure what people mean by prioritizing, and I'm not sure how, like, someone who talks about voting and how that would be difficult, but I'm not sure how the other suggestions are different than voting. Like, it seems like,
yeah, it's gonna have to.
yeah, I think it's gonna come down to how many people, and so I wanted to throw out the possibility that we can think about priorities in a different way. I don't know, like, I think everything that's in the report is a priority, right? So maybe we can insert some of the measures that people have talked about, right? Like, what can be accomplished in the short term, what will cost more money, what will save money, without saying this is more important than this. Because everything, and to Marty's point, I think everything in here is responsive to the executive order. So I worry about saying, you know, a list from 1 to 130.
Is it right, number 55?
So you're saying categorize by some criteria.
Right.
Well, I just wrote down a little template.
Wait,
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, what if you had a template where you had you had all the recommendations, and you had a couple of different categories, where you said, first of all, put everything down by what you think is I don't want to say easy, but simpler, more medium, something
More
that's
quick,
gonna be
more quick,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, something like that. By
Fully
that
cooked and ready for the spring.
Exactly. And then maybe another category of things that you can do, administratively are gonna require a law change. Another category. And then another category, you could say, is this something that can be done within 2 years or 3 years, and then something that's gonna take longer than that? And then even another one that would just have like, is this gonna be a new cost? Is this gonna be something we can use within existing resources and redirect existing resources? Or is this gonna be a savings? So you can almost have these different buckets and kind of things that and then you kind of get a sense then of however you want to slice it. But I think it's some basic data to be able to work from that. I don't know, that's something like that. I don't know if that's too complicated or, I mean, everybody would need to do that.
That does sound like a lot of research and some judgment too. Some of these recommendations might have existing resources but need new resources. And so to do that justice, for 130 recommendations, I think that would be a huge task.
I think it would have to be somebody just using their best judgment off the top of their head almost.
Well, the other thing I would just add to that is some of it's strategy, right? So there's some of it where it's like, well, this one has to come first before we can even get to that one.
I know we're running.
We're over 5, so let's. And Joe, do you want to have a last word representing CDS?
Go first, go ahead.
Go ahead, you first, then I'll go in.
Yeah, and, it's a great discussion. I think too, we want to hear from, the state, I'll just say exactly here today, how they want the recommendations. In other words, we don't want to really, we might think that they want it one way and they might want it another way, so we need some guidance. We'll also have to rely on a wonderful consultant too, because there's a lot of things that we may know, as far as recommendation with how it's gonna be done, and there may be things we don't know. And that's really important, as Marty said, and other folks said, to really keep it person-centered and base it on the priorities that's most important now, but also forecast for the future.
One other thing I just wanted to throw out as a possibility is partially, we've talked about this, obviously our objectives are listed out sort of in different categories, but one thing we could think about is having a priority for I don't want to say constituencies, but a priority that's very focused on caregivers, a recommendation that's very focused on paid workforce, you know what I mean? You could categorize things a little differently, a local recommendation or a state level recommendation doesn't only have to be sort of how we've broken it out. The other thing I just want to throw out is an idea about money, which I mentioned earlier, which is, you could say what we'd like to see is an investment of X number of dollars, and with that, we are hoping we will do these 10 things or whatever, you know, and again, it may not all get picked up, but I see shaking heads already.
Go for the moon, do it all, don't prioritize and cut ourselves at the knees.
Well, you know what, I think the thing is, though, what I'm hearing from people is that some people literally want to know, tell us what we can do, like, right this second, and, and.
Why not?
And the problem is, though, but this is.
Doesn't mean you don't want to do other things, but.
Right.
There's some things there's some asks that could come up soon.
And the other worrisome thing is, if we don't do any participation, somebody will.
Yes.
It might not be who we want to do it. So that's the other problem. And so I just, you know, I think it's gonna be a real challenge, but.
Yes.
Yeah, you know what, just, I know we have to wrap. So just as an example, so when we worked on the caregiver task force, we came out with a long report. We all sat down. What's the low-hanging fruit? What are the things we can get through in the next year? And we got through 2 of the 3, I think.
Yeah.
But, I mean, at some point, you're gonna have to do that, and then the next year, we said, okay, now we're gonna focus on this. And obviously, we're big, you know, there's more of us, we can do more, but I'm just giving you an example.
Can I just say, we have to wrap it up right now, we have no more captioner.
Oh, okay.
So we are going to wrap up the meeting. Joe, is there anything you wanna say?
Just, I feel like I'm being the best and the brightest. Thank you for all of your work.
Thank you.
Thank you, public, for your comments. Duly noted.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie.